The Iliad, Book 10. This is Your Mythology Book Club with Daniel Lucas Murphy.
Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm your host, Daniel. In this series, we're doing a very close reading of the Iliad, one book at a time. This is episode 10, and so we'll cover book 10. By listening to this entire podcast series, you will gain a more complete understanding and appreciation of the Iliad. As always, I'll be reading the text of the Iliad to you from the translation by Lang, Leaf, and Myers, interspersed with my own interpretations and those of various scholars whose works you will find referenced in the show notes. The Iliad comes to us from the depths of time. It was ancient to the ancients, who collected it from among even older stories and compiled it into the version we have. This means it's an artifact of literary culture that has been filtered through the minds of people from multiple time periods, each of which represent cultures far different from our own. Therefore, I'll go on tangents to explore some of the more confusing or intriguing historical, religious, and cultural points we'll come across. I'm not a professional scholar, but I am a very well-read amateur who has read various translations of the Iliad many, many times over the years. How I present the Iliad to you in this series is exactly how I read it each time, appreciating the language, enjoying the story, but also frequently pausing to ask why. Why are the characters doing these strange things? What about their time in history, their culture or religion would make them want to have done what they just did? Over the years, I've taken my questions to the scholarly literature and have been able to gain more and more insight with each question I've researched. Throughout this series, I'll share these insights with you. Getting a handle on why the characters in the Iliad are doing some of the things they're doing will help us understand their motivations. Seeing their motivations in the light of their own time period, culture, and religion will allow us to discover the very human story that forms the heart of the Iliad. We have reached book 10 of the Iliad. This is one of my absolute favorite books. It's so fun and so different from anything else in the Iliad for myriad reasons that we'll discuss shortly. For this episode, I did even more research than I normally do, and I uncovered so very much that I'm excited to share. As we move forward, I'll expound on what makes book 10 so very unique, how to appreciate it because of its oddities, and I'll share the secret theme concealed within this book that's all about concealed identities, the animal hidden within us all, and werewolves. Yes, werewolves. First, let's place Book 10 into its context with a brief review of where we're at in the overall story of the Iliad. After Achilles and Agamemnon had their falling out in Book 1, Achilles withdrew from participation in the war and prayed to his goddess mother for the Greeks to suffer and blame Agamemnon for insulting him. For a long time, however, the Greeks didn't suffer without Achilles, and it's an underappreciated fact that this delay in their suffering was due to the heroics of Diomedes, whom Achilles was not expecting would provide such an adequate substitute for his own prowess in battle. But starting in Book 8, things changed. Zeus's will changed. Diomedes was given an honorable but clearly necessary opportunity to retreat before a resurgent Trojan army, as Zeus finally got serious about honoring his promise to Achilles and his mother, which in Achilles' prayer was for Zeus to, quote, hem them, that is, the Greeks, among their ships' sterns about the bay, given over to slaughter, that they may make trial of their king, and that even Atreides, wide-ruling Agamemnon, may perceive his blindness, and that he honored not at all the best of the Achaeans. And in fact, this has already happened. In Book 8, the Trojans, led by Hector, did contain the Greeks among their ships. Fortunately for the Greeks, between the time of Achilles' prayer and the time of this containment of their forces, the Greeks had built fortifications around their camp, which had seemed unnecessary during the previous 9 years of the war due to the Greeks' overwhelming numbers and the participation of Achilles. But these fortifications, consisting of a wall with watchtowers and a surrounding ditch filled with spikes, prevented the Greeks from being outright slaughtered in Book 8, and they gave Hector and the Trojans pause. Rather than continue their rampage, as the day was ending at the close of Book 8, the Trojans chose instead to make camp, and they filled the plain of Troy and the valley of the Scamander River with their campfires. At the time the Greeks were building these fortifications, it had seemed contrived to us. And in retrospect, now that we've reached Book 10, it certainly was a decision that was driven by the narrative necessity to suit later story needs. But a little bit of narrative contrivance fits right in with Book 10, as you'll see. Book 9 began this long night, the Greeks surrounded, trapped within their fortified camp by the Trojans and their various allied nations, and there was a palpable sense that they would face their doom in the morning. That sense of doom will persist into Book 10. The second part of Achilles' prayer was answered in Book 9. Being hemmed in among their ships, yes, although not all slaughtered yet, the Greeks did blame Agamemnon for not honoring Achilles, and therefore they did blame Agamemnon for their becoming hemmed in among the ships. But as with Diomedes early in the Iliad, Achilles' and our expectations were again surprised, as Agamemnon not only readily accepted blame for his actions in dishonoring and driving away Achilles, but Agamemnon also publicly offered Achilles an enormous amount of treasure and real estate, and in fact his own daughter's hand in marriage, as a peace offering and public way of making amends. This all gave the Greeks hope that Achilles would rejoin the war effort, and it temporarily lifted that sense of doom hanging over the Greeks as they looked around and saw all those Trojan campfires filling the plain. Insolent, confident Trojans, no longer cowering behind their stone city walls. Achilles' closest friends among the Greek leadership, Odysseus, Telamonian Aias, and his foster father Phoenix, were chosen as the embassy to bring this offer of apology to Achilles on Agamemnon's behalf. Everything was going according to Achilles' plan, and Athene's promise to him of far greater treasures than that which Agamemnon had dishonored him by taking away was being handed right to him. But then Achilles surprised the Greeks, we the audience, and I suspect even himself, by rejecting this offer. During the time since he made his very public vow to withdraw from battle and his secret prayer for the Greeks to suffer, Achilles had done much thinking, soul-searching, and he'd come to realize treasure and honor and glory in battle aren't all there is to life. In fact, they weren't what he valued most in life at all, despite having joined this war for these very things that Agamemnon was then offering to him. He values love more now, time with his loved ones, especially Patroclus. He'd been planning on returning home to Greece in the morning to pursue that very goal, and to see his elderly father again, to live a long and happy life like his father has done. The efforts of Odysseus, Aias, and Phoenix didn't fall on deaf ears, however. Achilles was moved enough by their pleas to see that their friendship meant something to him as well. And so Achilles made the decision to stay, not to fight, however, and not to accept Agamemnon's offer, but to remain with the Greeks, seemingly out of some level of indecision and unstable balancing point between wanting to live a long and happy, if inglorious, life, and honoring his friendships among the Greeks. To Zeus, however, this is exactly as he had planned it, because Zeus has further plans for Achilles. Now that Zeus has answered Achilles' prayer and honored his promise to Achilles' divine mother, Zeus has his own goals now, fulfillment of the fate of Troy. And Achilles is the weapon he will use against that doomed city. To the Greeks, Achilles' rejection of Agamemnon's peace offer was a disappointing outcome. And Book 9 ended with Diomedes telling the other leaders he wished they hadn't even made this offer to Achilles, as it was not only a failure, but it has served to make Achilles even more arrogant. There will be more of Diomedes, our very competent Achilles substitute, in Book 10. Still, in that long night, which began with the encampment of the victorious Trojans at sunset surrounding the Greek camp, and continued through the Greeks' failed attempt in Book 9 to convince Achilles to save them from the Greeks, who are just ready to pounce and complete their destruction of the Greeks and their ships at the first light of dawn. Book 10 will take place entirely within this same very long night, and it's the deepest, darkest part of the night. This book has a nightmarish, unreal quality to it, which is partly due to stylistic choices and partly due to either questioned authorship or possibly just later composition, all factors which we will address and discuss once we've gotten into 10 and experienced some of what makes it feel so different. Book 10. Now, beside the ships, the other leaders of the whole Achaean host were sleeping all night long, by soft sleep overcome. But Agamemnon, son of Atreus, shepherd of the host, sweet sleep held not. So many things he debated in his mind. And even as when the lord of fair-tressed Hera lighteneth, fashioning either a mighty rain unspeakable, or hail, or snow, when the flakes sprinkle all the ploughed lands, or fashioning perchance the wide mouth of bitter war, even so oft in his breast groaned Agamemnon, from the very deep of his heart, and his spirits trembled within him. And whensoever he looked toward that Trojan plain, he marveled at the many fires that blazed in front of Ilios, and at the sound of flutes and pipes, and the noise of men. But whensoever to the ships he glanced, and the host of the Achaeans, then rent he many a lock clean forth from his head, to Zeus that is above, and greatly groaned his noble heart. While the other Greeks are asleep, Agamemnon is restless, kept awake by his own racing thoughts. He's compared to Zeus when the god of storms is upset, flashing lightning, preparing a tempest. Agamemnon is groaning aloud, worried about the morning and the impending destruction of the Greek army and ships at the hands of the ascendant Trojans, clearly now favored by Zeus of the storm. Agamemnon's gaze strays across to the Trojan camp, or rather the great Trojan encampment that fills the entire plain, at their innumerable campfires, at the sounds of their armies already active, at the music they're already or maybe are still playing. How can Agamemnon see the Trojan camp through the Greek defensive wall? It's not clear. This is maybe evidence of a bit of pre-wall narrative left in. Or maybe we can imagine the campfire-filled plain rising in the distance from the valley of the Scamander River to the city of Troy built upon the heights beyond. Regardless of how Agamemnon perceives them, there is no doubt that the Trojans are confident, while the Greeks are subdued, doubtful. No wonder Agamemnon can't sleep. As the audience, we weren't expecting anything more from this night. Book 9 ended with a traditional statement about the Greeks all taking the boon of sleep, indicating the next thing for us to expect would be the morning. In this way, Book 10 is a bonus, an unexpected event, and kind of nightmarish too. Book 10 is unreal, dreamlike, and like a dream, what happens here will be quickly forgotten in the morning. While Book 10 relies on the previous 9 books for its setup, nothing that happens in 10 has any direct impact on later events of the Iliad. A vague effect on the attitudes of the combatants once we enter Book 11, like the unease lingering after a nightmare, or rather an unreasonable but welcome buoying of spirits after a night of pleasant dreams, these will be the only lasting effects of the strange events we're about to experience. And this in his soul seemed to him the best counsel, to go first of all to Nestor, son of Neleus, if perchance he might contrive with him some right device that should be for the warding off of evil from all the Danaans. Then he rose, and did on his doublet about his breast, and beneath his shining feet he bound on fair sandals, and thereafter clad him in the tawny skin of a lion, fiery and great, a skin that reached to the feet, and he grasped his spear. In his restless insomnia, Agamemnon decides to go visit Nestor, whom he must have just spoken with not more than a couple hours ago at most, to see if Nestor has somehow come up with some idea to save them all, that he's just not shared for whatever reason. Wrapping himself in a lion skin coat, like Heracles used to wear, and grabbing a spear, Agamemnon gets ready to head out into the night. This is the first of several very strange animal skin clothing choices in Book 10. In fact, of the major characters in Book 10, only Odysseus and Nestor will be wearing the regular non-animal skin clothing we usually see them in. But Odysseus will have some other animal-like attributes that we'll discuss once we reach him. Prior to Book 10 and its strange insistence on animal wear for almost everyone, only Paris had been described as wearing such a thing, which was in Book 3 when he challenged Menelaus to a duel. In that context, the panther skin Paris was wearing made him seem like he was a bit too concerned about his appearance to meet the standard of a manly Bronze Age man. There, the author had used a panther skin cloak as a way to say that Paris was vain. But that was a statement about Paris himself, not about the panther. However, each time a character in Book 10 puts on a piece of animal skin clothing, it's saying something about the character based on what animal it is. and the menagerie of Book 10 will say different things about each character. For Agamemnon, the implications are obvious. He's wearing a lion skin cloak. That's the king of beasts. Agamemnon is the high king. Simple, appropriate, straightforward. Future examples will require more interpretation. This first one is to just give us the pattern to look for. And even in likewise, did trembling fear take hold on Menelaus? For neither on his eyelids did sleep settle down, lest somewhat should befall the Argives, who verily for his sake over wide waters were come to Troy land, with fierce war in their thoughts. With a dappled pard's skin, first he covered his broad shoulders, and he raised and set on his head a casque of bronze, and took a spear in his strong hand. Then went he on his way to rouse his brother, that mightily ruled over all the Argives, and as a god was honored by the people. Him found he harnessing his goodly gear about his shoulders, by the stern of the ship, and glad to his brother was his coming. Then Menelaus of the loud war cry first accosted him. Wherefore thus, dear brother, art thou arming? Wilt thou speed forth any of thy comrades to spy on the Trojans? Nay, terribly I fear, lest none should undertake for thee this deed, even to go and spy out the foemen alone through the ambrosial night. Needs must he be a man right hardy of heart. The scene shifts briefly now to Menelaus, who coincidentally also can't sleep and also arms himself and puts on a coat made from a different big cat, a leopard in this case, archaically referred to as a pard in this translation, and goes to Agamemnon's tent while his older brother is still dressing. The use of a leopard skin for Menelaus could have a few different meanings here. For one, it's a lesser big cat than the lion which is worn by his brother, the High King Agamemnon. Menelaus, also wearing a lion, would have seemed inappropriate and confusing. As just mentioned, the only other use of an animal skin garment in the Iliad is Paris having worn one in Book 3. Significantly, that was when Paris appeared for his duel with Menelaus. This makes me think there's something of a callback intended here, a way for the author to link Menelaus to Paris in our minds. It's meant for us to paint Menelaus with the same brush as Paris, for both men to be associated with everything that leopards meant in the ancient world. The leopard would have reminded the ancients of the god Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and irresponsible abandon, among other traits, but I believe in this case it's specifically these attributes of Dionysus our minds are being drawn toward. Dionysus was often portrayed leading a whole procession of wild drunks, maenads, satyrs, and leopards. This is the association we're to make not only with Paris, but now also with Menelaus. Outside of Book 10, Menelaus is portrayed as a responsible leader, but not as the best warrior, and certainly in need of protection often from the stronger Greeks. However, in Book 10, Menelaus undergoes something of a temporary recharacterization, becoming irresponsible and unreliable. Menelaus will unfairly have a number of insults of this nature spoken about him behind his back throughout this setup to the main action of Book 10. The insults about Menelaus are especially unjustified, given that he woke and sought to remedy the Greek situation just as Agamemnon did, in the first of many contrived, parallel actions among pairs of characters in this book. While Agamemnon was just stepping out of his hut, Menelaus appears. Menelaus asks his brother a very leading and not at all organically arising question. Are you going to send anyone to spy on the Trojans? This is a forced, stilted way for the author to spill the beans on Book 10's plot, which is that the Greeks will send someone to spy on the Trojan camp to get an idea of what they're up against in the morning. Menelaus then proceeds directly into his fears that no one will volunteer for this spying mission he's suddenly convinced will happen, despite no prior discussion. Nowhere else in the Iliad is there any kind of espionage or guerrilla warfare. It's otherwise all very have at you, direct battle, with so very much unstrategic corpse looting. The appearance here and only here of something approaching military strategy is alone an argument that 10 is a late addition, as well as the fact that only here there might be some not entirely heroic type of action. Spying does feel unheroic in the same Bronze Age sense of archery feeling unheroic. What's heroic is facing an opponent directly in combat. However, the action in Book 10 will not only become unheroic, it will ultimately have an unclean, criminal feel to it, a moral ambiguity which will then have to be addressed. The only thing that could redeem spying and make it somewhat heroic in the Bronze Age sense is if there's some looting. Hopefully, whoever volunteers for this mission gets some good looting in, if only to maintain his reputation. Then the Lord Agamemnon answered him and spake, Need of good counsel have I and thou, Menelaus, fosterling of Zeus, of counsel that will help and save the Argives and the ships, since the heart of Zeus hath turned again. Surely on the sacrifices of Hector hath he set his heart rather than on ours. For never did I see, nor heard any tell, that one man devised so many terrible deeds in one day as Hector, dear to Zeus, hath wrought on the sons of the Achaeans, unaided, though no dear son of a goddess is he, nor of a god. He hath done deeds that methinks will be a sorrow to the Argives, lasting and long. Such evils hath he devised against the Achaeans. But go now, run swiftly by the ships, and summon Aias and Idomeneus. But I will betake me to noble Nestor, and bid him arise, if perchance he will be fain to go to the sacred company of the sentinels, and lay on them his command. For to him above others would they listen, for his own son is chief among the sentinels. He and the brother in arms of Idomeneus, even Meriones, for to them above all we entrusted this charge. Agamemnon answers Menelaus' unprompted question about whether he's going to dispatch anyone on a spying mission by not answering that question at all. Rather, Agamemnon talks right past Menelaus, saying they need advice, since it's obvious Zeus's mind has changed, and he now favors the Trojans. This is true. Zeus does favor the Trojans now. Rather than engaging his suddenly irresponsible brother in a conversation, Agamemnon directs Menelaus to go get Telamonian Aias and Idomeneus to join them, while he proceeds on to speak with Nestor for the advice he wants. It's also true that Agamemnon's plan already was to go speak with Nestor, but we now learn Agamemnon wants more than just general advice from Nestor. Agamemnon wants to gather up Nestor before approaching the guards, whom he wants to give some command that's not identified for us yet. Agamemnon is getting Nestor first before approaching the guards because, as we're expected to remember from Book 9, Nestor's son, Thrasymedes, is the captain of the guards they posted to watch the camp this long night, and he wants to have Nestor with him to ensure the guard captain does what he wants. In all likelihood, what Agamemnon wants is simply for them all to inspect the guards, to ensure that they're keeping a good eye on things. This is like someone making sure the stove is off before leaving the house, or going around and seeing that all the doors and windows are locked. This is a manifestation of Agamemnon's anxiety, one of his most consistent traits, no matter which book of the Iliad we're in. As for why Agamemnon is worried the guards won't do what he wants, this is maybe a little off character for him, and a subtle sign of Book 10's dreamlike quality, or maybe not. My picture of Agamemnon is that he's always doubtful of himself, an anxious, uncertain leader who covers up his self-doubt with bluster. If this is an example of Book 10 weirdness, it's more likely due to another stylistic tendency in this book, which is to have the author's intended action drive the characters forward, even if it results in illogical actions. The author has a plan, and his players have to adjust their otherwise well-drawn characters to suit the plot, which is racing ahead of us, and the characters like an unbroken horse. In Book 10, our otherwise familiar characters feel a bit like puppets to me, being pulled about on their strings, rather than the fully realized humans they are elsewhere in the Iliad. Then Menelaus of the loud war cry answered him, How meanest thou this word wherewith thou dost command and exhort me? Am I to abide there with them, waiting till thou comest? Or run back again to thee, when I have well delivered to them thy commandment? Then the king of men, Agamemnon, answered him again, There do thou abide, lest we miss each other as we go, for many are the paths through the camp. But call aloud wheresoever thou goest, and bid men awake, naming each man by his lineage, and his father's name, and giving all their dues of honor. Nor be thou proud of heart. Nay, rather let us ourselves be laboring. For even thus doth Zeus from our very birth dispense to us the heaviness of toil. So he spake, and sent his brother away, having clearly laid on him his commandment. Menelaus asks Agamemnon for some clarification on the mission. I would too. This guy is all over the place. Menelaus wants to know if he's supposed to wait there with the people he's been told to wake up, Idomeneus and Telamonian Aias, or if he's supposed to wake them and then they're all to run and join Agamemnon with Nestor. A fair question, However, Agamemnon gives an answer he clearly could not have meant, telling Menelaus to wait there for him so they don't miss each other in the night. Where is there? He's to wake these two guys and then stand around with them in front of their huts, apologizing until Agamemnon finally shows up? These instructions are unclear to Menelaus and confusing to us as well. Fortunately, Menelaus and the leaders he awakens ultimately won't follow Agamemnon's nonsensical command. Here's a good way to picture what's about to happen. The Greek camp is just ships pulled up onto the beach, remember, and these ships have been beached here for years, so that everyone knows exactly where along this horizontal plane each leader and his men are, centered around, of course, their own ships. Right now, we're with Agamemnon and Menelaus near their adjacent groups of beached ships, very close to the extreme left side of the beach. Agamemnon is sending Menelaus to wake the only two leaders whose ships are to the left of their own, Idomeneus, which is in the second to last position, and Telamonian Aias, whose ships mark the extreme left end of the Greek camp. Agamemnon is going first to Nestor, whose ships are immediately to the right of his own in the direction of the vast majority of the Greek encampment. So Agamemnon gives Menelaus advice on how to approach these other leaders, which may be a signal of just how worried Agamemnon is, as well as a sign of the irresponsible, unreliable characterization of Menelaus in Book 10, that his brother would think he needs instructions on how to address their fellow leaders. Agamemnon's anxiety is hard at work tonight, although tonight of all nights, his anxiety is, I would say, well justified. The Greeks are in a dangerous situation here. The Trojans fill the plain with their campfires, and with Zeus on their side now, the morning could be bad for the Greeks. Then went he himself after Nestor, the shepherd of the host, whom he found by his hut and black ship. In his bed, beside him lay his fair dight arms, a shield and 2 spears, and a shining helmet. Beside him lay his glittering girdle, wherewith the old man was wont to gird himself, when he harnessed him for war, the bane of men, and led on the host, for he yielded not to grievous old age. Then he raised him on his elbow, lifting his head, and spake to the son of Atreus, inquiring of him with this word, Who art thou that farest alone by the ships, through the camp, in the dark night, when other mortals are sleeping? Seekest thou one of thy mules, or of thy comrades? Speak, and come not silently upon me. What need hast thou? Then the king of men, Agamemnon, answered him, O Nestor, son of Neleus, great glory of the Achaeans, thou shalt know Agamemnon, son of Atreus, whom above all men Zeus hath planted forever among labors, while my breath abides within my breast, and my knees move. I wander thus, for that sweet sleep rests not on mine eyes, but war is my care, and the troubles of the Achaeans. Yea, greatly I fear for the sake of the Danaans, nor is my heart firm, but I am tossed to and fro, and my heart is leaping from my breast, and my good knees tremble beneath me. But if thou wilt do aught, since neither on thee cometh sleep, let us go thither to the sentinels, that we may see them, lest they be fordone with toil and drowsyhead, and so are slumbering, and have quite forgotten to keep watch. And hostile men camp hard by, nor know we at all but that they are keen to do battle in the night. We follow Agamemnon now as he approaches Nestor's camp with the intention of waking him, but the old man is already awake, hears someone approaching, and calls out in a formalized, formulaic way that will be repeated by other characters shortly, part of the mirroring and contrasting built into Book 10. Agamemnon replies, It's me, but he doesn't just come out and say he wants advice, he beats around the bush, talking about how Zeus heaps trouble on him, and how obviously neither of us can sleep, and asks if Nestor wants to join him on an inspection of the sentries. I'm not sure why he doesn't just come out and tell Nestor he wants advice. Nestor gives unsolicited advice all the time. He'd be delighted that someone's actually asking to hear what he has to say for once. There are a fair number of awakenings in Book 10. Nestor is unique in that he's the only person approached who's already awake. Nestor will also be unique in one more way that I'll point out shortly. Be on the lookout for that, because I have a little theory I'm cooking up here involving Nestor and his uniqueness in Book 10. Then knightly Nestor of Gerenia answered him, Most renowned son of Atreus, Agamemnon, king of men, assuredly not all his designs will wise counseling Zeus fulfill for Hector, even all that now he thinketh. Nay, methinks he will contend with even more troubles, if but Achilles turneth back his heart from grievous anger. and verily will I follow after thee. But let us also rouse others again, both the son of Tydeus, spearman renowned, and Odysseus, and swift Aias, and the strong son of Phyleus. But well it would be if one were to go and call those also, the godlike Aias, and Idomeneus the prince, for their ships are furthest of all, and nowise close at hand. But Menelaus will I blame, dear as he is and worshipful, yea, even if thou be angry with me, nor will I hide my thought, for that he slumbereth, and to thee alone hath left the toil. Now should he be toiling among all the chiefs, and beseeching them, for need no longer tolerable is coming upon us. So Nestor is saying he doesn't think that all of Zeus's plans for the benefit of the Trojans will end up happening, especially if Achilles rejoins the fight, and says he'll accompany Agamemnon and that the two of them should go and wake up all the other leaders, and names several of them, starting with Diomedes and Odysseus, who will ultimately be our primary protagonists once we get to the main action in this book. Nestor says it's too bad Aias and Idomeneus' ships are so far off, but that someone should go wake those two as well. Then Nestor goes out of his way to badmouth Menelaus, which is unnecessary and unfair, since this last task is exactly what Menelaus is up to at this very moment. But this is more of the weird Book 10 recharacterization of Menelaus. He'll be back in his normal role as a mid-tier warrior needing protection, but plenty courageous, when we awake from the strange dream that is this book. And the king of men, Agamemnon, answered him again, Old man, another day I even bid thee blame him, for often is he slack, and willeth not to labor, yielding neither to unreadiness nor heedlessness of heart, but looking toward me, and expecting mine instance. But as now he awoke far before me, and came to me, and him I sent forward to call those concerning whom thou inquirest. But let us be gone, and them shall we find before the gates, among the sentinels, for there I bade them gather. Agamemnon does defend Menelaus, but not very strongly, saying his brother does leave work undone, but only because he's only looking to him for guidance. Again, not something shown outside Book 10. Agamemnon goes on to say that not only did Menelaus wake first, but that he's been given orders to rouse the rest of the camp. And then Agamemnon forgets that he told Menelaus to wait with Idomeneus and Telamonian and Aias, telling Nestor that he ordered those three to meet them at the gates among the guards. Fortunately, Menelaus will have the sense not to follow the actual instructions he was given, and this somewhat tedious setup to Book 10 won't have a stumbling around in the dark looking for each other portion. Then knightly Nestor of Gerenia answered him, So will none of the Argives be wroth with him or disobey him, whensoever he doth urge anyone and give him his commands. So spake he, and did on his doublet about his breast, and beneath his bright feet he bound goodly shoon, and all around him buckled a purple cloak, with double folds and wide, and thick down all over it. And he took a strong spear, pointed with sharp bronze, and he went among the ships of the mail-clad Achaeans. Nestor responds, it's good that it was Agamemnon who gave Menelaus the orders to rouse everyone, so that the men won't contradict or ignore him, implying that's something they would have done if the orders were coming from irresponsible Menelaus, rather than Agamemnon. More subtle and uncalled for digs at Menelaus here. Nestor gears up, putting on a dignified purple cloak, well insulated against the cold, and a bronze spear, and oh, it's here that I learned an archaic plural form of shoe is shoon. Nestor is wearing just shoes, which is kind of boring. He's also one of only two characters in Book 10 who doesn't put on any kind of animal skin clothing, and the only one who puts on literally zero animal-related gear at all. And what does this mean? It could be as simple as Nestor being a retired elder statesman, not part of the action with the younger warriors. But I don't think it's just that. Nestor has been involved in battle already in the Iliad, and he grabs a spear just now. So there's more to Nestor's role here. And we've already seen that the author of Book 10 signals intentions to us. This is a very symbol-heavy book. Nestor plays some very special role here, which will make sense to us at the end of Book 10. For now, let's keep in the back of our minds that Nestor kind of stands alone. and continue to follow the action as Nestor and Agamemnon proceed out into the camp to wake more of the leaders. Then Odysseus first, the peer of Zeus in council, did knightly Gerenian Nestor arouse out of sleep with his voice, and quickly the cry came all about his heart, and he came forth from the hut and spake to them, saying, Wherefore thus among the ships and through the camp do ye wander alone in the ambrosial night? What so great need cometh upon you? Then knightly Nestor of Gerenia answered him, Laertes' son, of the seed of Zeus, Odysseus of many a wile, be not wroth, for great trouble besetteth the Achaeans. Nay, follow, that we may arouse others too, even all that it behoveth to take counsel, whether we should fly or fight. So spake he, and Odysseus of the many counsels came to the hut, and cast a shield bedight about his shoulders, and went after them. And they went to seek Diomedes, son of Tydeus, and him they found outside his hut, with his arms, and around him his comrades were sleeping with their shields beneath their heads, but their spears were driven into the ground, erect on the spikes of the butts, and afar shone the bronze, like the lightning of Father Zeus. Now that hero was asleep, and under him was strewn the hide of an ox of the field, but beneath his head was stretched a shining carpet. Beside him went and stood knightly Nestor of Gerenia, and stirred him with a touch of his foot, and aroused him, chiding him to his face. Wake, son of Tydeus, why all night long dost thou sleep? Knowst thou not that the Trojans on the high place of the plain are camped near the ships, and but a little space holdeth them apart? So spake he, and Diomedes sprang swiftly up out of sleep, and spake out to him winged words. Hard art thou, old man, and from toil thou never ceaseth. Now are there not other younger sons of the Achaeans, who might rouse when there is need each of the kings, going all round the host? But thou, old man, art indomitable. Nestor goes out to wake men. He seems to have a plan. I'm glad someone does, and this isn't all just Agamemnon's anxiety causing everyone to wander around aimlessly. It's unusual for Nestor to not explain his plan. He's normally very talky, but I'll take the determined action at this point and trust it's leading somewhere. Nestor reaches Odysseus' ships quickly, since these are the very next ones to the right of his own, and wakes Odysseus, who joins him without incident. Proceeding farther to the right along the beach, the hero Eurypylus' ships are passed without his name being mentioned, in favor of Diomedes, whose ships are the next along the beach. Reaching Diomedes, who is sleeping outside, Nestor literally kicks Diomedes awake. Don't be fooled by translations like this one that use phrases such as a touch of his foot. The verb here is ekbale, the source of our word ballistic. Nestor used his foot to throw Diomedes out of his bed. Nestor kicked Diomedes. Both Odysseus and Diomedes respond to Nestor in contrived, formulaic ways similar to how Nestor responded to Agamemnon approaching him. And there's a little comparison at play here, showing off the differing characters of Odysseus and Diomedes. When Nestor found Odysseus, he was sleeping in his tent, as befits an older king. He wakes quickly, wants few words to understand what's going on. Odysseus just took in the situation and moved forward. By contrast, Diomedes is sleeping outside, where it's easy for Nestor to just come up and kick him. Diomedes then wonders aloud to Nestor if this task of rousing the host couldn't have been managed by some younger man, why they left this job for old Nestor. Diomedes, younger, is making a bigger deal about everything. And him, knightly Nestor of Gerenia, answered again, Nay, verily, my son, all this that thou sayest is according unto right. Noble sons have I, and there be many of the host, of whom each man might go and call the others. But a right great need hath assailed the Achaeans. For now to all of us it standeth on a razor's edge, either pitiful ruin for the Achaeans, or life. But come now, if indeed thou dost pity me, rouse swift Aias, and the son of Phyleus, for thou art younger than I. Nestor lays out the situation for Diomedes and us with a metaphor that's still common now, telling Diomedes that the fate of the Greeks this night stands upon a razor's edge. How many modern movies use this same phrase? And yet we're still not done with the setup. Nestor tells Diomedes to go now wake swift Aias, which I take to mean the other one, Oilean Aias, and the son of Phyleus, who is Meges, leader of the Epean or Dulichian Greeks. Do we need these guys right now? Not really, but Nestor's on a roll, and we're just going to have to let him run with it. So spake he, and Diomedes cast round his shoulders the skin of a great fiery lion, that reached to his feet, and he grasped his spear and started on his way and roused the others from their place and led them on. So Diomedes gears up now, grabbing his spear and putting on a lion's skin cloak. I don't recall any other times that Diomedes is seen wearing a lion's skin. Diomedes' lion skin is similar to Agamemnon's. Both are described as fiery, which I take to mean of a similar yellowish-reddish color as modern lions, and both cloaks reach all the way down to the ground. What is the author saying about Diomedes by having him wear the same animal as High King Agamemnon? Diomedes is among the youngest of the Greek leaders, so him wearing the most royal animal seems a little off. But Book 10 is dreamlike, with its own logic that we have to work out for ourselves. Here's my interpretation of the dream logic that has placed a lion skin on Diomedes. Diomedes is the hero who kept the Greeks in the fight throughout the whole first part of the Iliad. He was our Achilles stand-in, and this is the mark of that high status. Now, when they had come among the assembled sentinels, they found not the leaders of the sentinels asleep, but they all sat wide awake with their arms. And even as hounds keep difficult guard round the sheep in a fold, listening to the hardy wild beast that cometh through the wood among the hills, and much clamor riseth round him of hounds and men, and sleep perisheth from them, even so sweet sleep did perish from their eyes, as they watched through the wicked night. For ever were they turning toward the plains, when they heard the Trojans moving. And that old man was glad when he saw them, and heartened them with his saying, and calling out to them he spake winged words. Even so now, dear children, do ye keep watch, nor let sleep take any man, lest we become a cause of rejoicing to them that hate us. Nestor, along with Odysseus and Diomedes, and presumably also Agamemnon in tow, although we haven't heard him speak in a while, they all finally reach the gates, guarded still by those captains of the guards, whose names were mentioned in Book 9, among them Nestor's own son Thrasymedes, as well as Meriones, the friend and companion of the Cretan king Idomeneus. Nestor greets the guards, gladdened to see they're still keeping a vigilant watch over the defenses, looking always through the arrow slots and down from upon their watchtowers at the Trojans on the plain whenever they hear sounds arising from the enemies outside. Nestor reminds the guards to stay awake, guys. So saying, he sped through the moat, and they followed with him the kings of the Argives, who had been called to the council. And with them went Meriones, and the glorious son of Nestor, for they called them to share their counsel. So they went clean out of the delved fosse, and sat down in the open, where the mid-space was clear of dead men fallen, where fierce Hector had turned again from destroying the Argives, when night covered all. Nestor now leads his following through the gate in the fortifications, over the spike-filled ditch, presumably using a lowered drawbridge, to the field where, in the distance, the Trojans have their camps around their campfires, which I'm now imagining as dying down to embers, and the enemy mostly asleep. Meriones is asked to join them. He's certainly the most noteworthy of the guard captains. But why would they all follow Nestor out into the night, past their defenses, to the enemy-filled field, without any one of them asking why? It does not seem necessary to go out here. I get going to the defenses. Agamemnon's original plan was to check up on the sentries, something that would allay his chronic anxiety for a moment, and Nestor is leading these men to meet with Agamemnon and share whatever plan he's come up with. Since it's so illogical for them to place themselves beyond the defenses, into the dark night where lurking enemies could overhear their plans, I have to imagine their going out here is for dramatic effect. A contrived decision of Book 10's author to illustrate the direness of their situation at the expense of making sense. When Nestor and his group arrive, they find Menelaus waiting for them, along with the men he gathered, Telamonian Aias and Idomeneus. Thank goodness Menelaus disregarded Agamemnon's nonsensical instructions to wait for him at Aias's place, or we'd be chasing them down in the dark like a Scooby-Doo episode right now, popping in and out of tents, missing each other, the pursuer becoming the pursued, and various other wacky hijinks. It's here, beyond their defenses for no discernible reason other than added drama on the part of the author, in the dark of the night, possibly within earshot of lurking enemies, that Nestor will finally reveal his plan. There sat they down, and declared their saying each to the other, and to them knightly Nestor of Gerenia began discourse. O friends, is there then no man that would trust to his own daring spirit, to go among the great-hearted Trojans, if perchance he might take some straggler of the enemy, yea, or hear perchance some rumour among the Trojans, and what tidings they devise among themselves, whether they are fain to abide there by the ships, away from the city, or will retreat again to the city, now that they have conquered the Achaeans. All this might such an one learn, and come back to us scatheless. Great would be his fame under heaven among all men, and a goodly gift will be given him. For all the best men that bear sway by the ships, each and all of them will give him a black ewe, with a lamb at her foot. No chattel may compare with her, and ever will he be present at feasts and clan drinkings. So spake he. Nestor's big plan is to get a volunteer to go spy on the Trojans, since the Greeks are in dire straits, and for the first time the Trojans are camped out in the field where spying is an option, rather than having gone back inside the walled city for the night. Menelaus came up with this plan forever ago, but suddenly tonight no one is listening to him. Anyway, Nestor says maybe you could catch some random Trojan wandering around and squeeze him for information, learn what their strategies are, and whether they plan on staying out in the field, or if they plan on going back within the city at some point. And Nestor isn't saying just to do this to, maybe save us from certain doom in the morning. No, who would do that? The honor you accrue in battle will be all you have to talk about for all eternity in the dim underworld. So, if anything, the impending doom of the morning would just make the men even more covetous for loot. And since it's loot they want, it's loot Nestor is offering. Whoever volunteers for this mission, we, as in all us Greek leaders here, will all agree to give those volunteers sheep, and we'll invite the volunteers to all our feasts. Assuming there will be any more feasts, like if we all don't die in the morning, you can look forward to sweet invites to feasts. Thereon were they all silent, holding their peace. But to them spake Diomedes of the loud war cry. Nestor, my heart and manful spirit urge me to enter the camp of the foemen hard by, even of the Trojans. But and if some other man will follow with me, more comfort and more courage will there be. If two go together, one before another perceiveth a matter, how there may be gain therein. But if one alone perceive aught, even so his wit is shorter, and weak his device. So spake he. Nestor's request for volunteers to spy on the Trojans is met with silence in a moment of dramatic tension, which serves to illustrate heroism when Diomedes volunteers to go. However, Diomedes says he wants someone else to go with him, as he'll have better judgment if he has another person with him to figure out how to proceed. What a modest young man. Many were they that wished to follow Diomedes. The two Iontes were willing, men of Ares' company, and Meriones was willing, and right willing the son of Nestor, and the son of Atreus, Menelaus, spearman renowned. Yea, and the hardy Odysseus was willing to steal into the throng of Trojans, for always daring was his heart within him. But among them spake the king of men, Agamemnon. Diomedes, son of Tydeus, joy of mine heart, thy comrade verily shalt thou choose, whomsoever thou wilt, the best of them that be here, for many are eager. But do not thou, out of reverent heart, leave the better man behind, and give thyself the worse companion, yielding to regard for any and looking to their lineage, even if one be more kingly born. So spake he, but was in fear for the sake of fair-haired Menelaus. Several of the chiefs are said to be eager to join Diomedes, including both Aiases, Meriones, Thrasymedes, Menelaus, and Odysseus. Agamemnon suggests to Diomedes that he choose whichever one he thinks is best, and not to let other considerations come into play. Just pick the best man for the job. But Agamemnon, anxious Agamemnon, didn't really mean that, because he secretly hopes that little brother Menelaus isn't chosen by Diomedes, the Menelaus who is suddenly in Book 10 thought of as such a loser by everyone else, and who would certainly bungle the mission and end up getting himself killed. It's actually kind of fun to have a doofus character in the Iliad that they talk bad about behind his back and bite their tongue hoping he doesn't get picked for missions. But regular old competent Menelaus will be back soon, and this schlub Menelaus will be left behind in the dreamland that is Book 10. But to them again answered Diomedes of the loud war cry. If indeed ye bid me choose myself a comrade, how then could I be unmindful of godlike Odysseus, whose heart is passing eager, and his spirit so manful in all manner of toils, and Pallas Athene loveth him. But while he cometh with me, even out of burning fire might we both return, for he excelleth in understanding. Diomedes chooses Odysseus, saying he's always ready for a fight. Athene loves him, and the two of them together could pass through fire and back. He's such a smart guy. Diomedes is a big Odysseus fan. Me too, Diomedes, me too. Then him again answered the steadfast, noble Odysseus. Son of Tydeus, praise me not overmuch, neither blame me aught, for thou speakest thus among the Argives, that themselves know all. But let us be going, for truly the night is waning, and near is the dawn, and the stars have gone onward, and the night has advanced more than 2 watches, but the 3rd watch is yet left. So spake they, and hardest them in their dread armor. Odysseus is like, don't give me undue praise or blame, since we're here among the other Greek leaders who know us all well. He just wants to get moving. They only have about the last third of the night left to get anything done with. Plus, Diomedes loves how practical Odysseus is, but he keeps that praise to himself. Wow, we finally have our protagonists for Book 10, Diomedes and Odysseus. And we have our mission, to spy on the Trojans, maybe capture some stumbling Trojan fool and compel him to give up military secrets. It's been a long road to get here, but it's been good because all this setup has given you a sense of Book 10's unique feel. Now, before we join Diomedes and Odysseus on their nighttime raid into the Trojan camp, this is the perfect time for our digression into what makes Book 10 so very different from the rest of the Iliad. Malcolm Wilcock, author of A Companion to the Iliad, points out that Book 10 has a unique position in the Iliad, in that it is a complete incident in itself and could be removed from the epic without leaving any trace. Similarly, Walter Leaf, one of the translators of the version of the Iliad used in this podcast, wrote in his commentary, "There are few indeed so conservative as to hold that Book 10 belongs to the original story. In manner and matter alike, it is a little world by itself, a loose stone which can be taken away without loss to the structure." As I mentioned in the opening of this episode, Book 10 does have a dreamlike, at times almost nightmarish quality to it. And like a dream, the events that happen here will have no impact in the morning. However, this doesn't explain Book 10, it merely describes it. We can do more now to explain Book 10. Wilcock also writes, a note in the Scholia, repeated by Eustachius, runs as follows. The ancient critics say that this rhapsody was a separate composition by Homer and not included by him in the Iliad, but added to the epic by Pisistratos. This statement is connected with the occasional assertion in late antiquity that the text of Homer was established at Athens under the tyrant Pisistratos in the 6th century, when arrangements were made for its recitation in full at the Panathenaic festival. Keep in mind that we're talking about a long period of time here, between when the Trojan War was believed to have happened, when the Iliad was written, and then much later the classical period in which the Iliad was assembled into the fairly static version we have today. Let's break this down a bit. Pisistratos was a leader of Athens in the 6th century BCE, in various terms of office from the 560s through 520s. Scholia, of course, were margin notes on copies of ancient texts such as the Iliad, which can often give further context, illuminate details, and give us indications of how ancient people interpreted these texts. This Scholia Wilcock is talking about fits the general idea that we and the ancients share, which is that it wasn't until this relatively late date in Athens during the reign of Pisistratos that the complete Iliad we have now was assembled. Most estimates place Homer in the 8th or 9th century, and the Trojan War he was writing about was believed by the ancients to have taken place in the 13th or 12th century. Eratosthenes, who was head librarian at Alexandria in the 2nd century, believed the fall of Troy to have occurred specifically in 1184 BCE. We don't take the year 1184 seriously, of course, but it's useful to understand what the ancients believed. This Scholia Wilcock is discussing is evidence of an ancient writer trying to bridge the gap between maintaining the fiction of a single Iliad author named Homer and the more obvious fact that some parts of the Iliad, Book 10 in particular, just seem too different from the rest for all 24 books to have come from one hand. There is linguistic evidence in Book 10 for a slightly later authorship than the rest of the Iliad, closer to the date of the Odyssey, which Wilcock says look like pseudo-archaisms, as if a later poet, not of the oral tradition, is trying his hand. However, he notes that such later terms can be found throughout the Iliad, and that these later words aren't any more common here than elsewhere. What is more defensible is a position that 10 has a different style than the rest of the Iliad. This will be most obvious to us in the use of animal skin clothing, as such garments are almost totally unknown elsewhere in the Iliad. The other stylistic difference that I haven't been able to ignore ever since I first noticed it is the way Menelaus is portrayed, lazy and untrustworthy. Wilcock points out some more subtle stylistic differences as well. 10 makes excess use of contrast and parallelism. We will see the actions of the Greeks mirrored in what the Trojans will do, as well as surprise turns of events, bringing about ironic outcomes that contradict the expressed wishes of a number of characters. For all these reasons, 10 certainly feels different. It can be easy to dismiss Book 10 because it's so different from the rest of the Iliad. And it is different. But that doesn't mean it's not a fascinating and complex piece of literature, because it's also very, very much these things, and among my favorite books for good reasons beyond just the fun, adventurous nature of it. The author of Book 10, whoever that may be, is communicating quite a bit to us in symbolic ways. These various animal skins in particular are a way the author is telling us things about the character wearing the animal skin, but also about the relationships between characters. In Agamemnon's case, the message is probably as simple as, he's the king. So he's wearing the skin of the most kingly animal, the lion, which did exist in the Greek world at the time of the Iliad. As we go through Book 10, we'll explore more of what the author is telling us via these animal skins. While the ancients had their doubts about Homer's intention regarding Book 10, and suspected that he wrote it separately and not with the intention of including it in the Iliad, the ancients did not doubt that 10 was written by Homer, the same man who wrote the rest of the Iliad. For us, looking at how different 10 is, it can be tempting to think of Book 10 as having been written by someone else, written so much later that it couldn't have been by the same author or group of authors, and shoehorned into the Iliad a generation or more later. This would be a mistake, and we should trust the ancients on this, at least to the extent that 10 is roughly contemporaneous with the rest of the Iliad, only slightly later at most. Modern scholars agree that Book 10 is certainly very, very old, pointing out that the wording used here makes it no later than the Odyssey. However, Book 10 has long stood out among scholars who question the idea of a single composition by a single man named Homer. This is typically cited as the least Homeric book in the whole Iliad. I can't read ancient Greek, so I can't form my own judgment of how the poetry and wording differ from the rest of the text. But you can see as well as I can that in so many ways, the content, style, and characterizations in this book are different from what we're used to. Forced contrasts, the sudden appearance of animal skin clothing to make statements about characters, inconsistent characterization, poor attention to details, and a contrived plot that drives characters forward illogically at the author's whim are all unique to Book 10. All of these feel like they are decisions made by someone other than the author of any other part of the Iliad. Some scholars have argued that at least some of the differences of 10 are due to its focus on an ambush theme. I'll grant that this may account for some differences, but to my mind, this cannot account for so many stylistic differences. You can read much more about the scholarship behind Book 10 in the numerous articles linked in the show notes. I spent even more time than usual digging into the literature on this book to help me understand just why it's so very different from the rest of the Iliad. While I didn't come to any definitive conclusions, I learned so much, which has caused my appreciation for 10 to increase. I have a newfound appreciation for these stylistic oddities, discovering the messages its author is sending us, in addition to my long-standing love of the sneaking espionage aspects of this book. It's clear that these differences have been noted by serious readers or audiences of the Iliad from the very beginning. Even in ancient times, the separate nature of Book 10 was seen, the suspicion that it was only added to the larger composition by later editors, who dropped 10 into the spot at which it fits chronologically, but it's an imperfect fit, if for no other reason than that no characters ever make references to the events that happen here at any later point in the Iliad. And this theory is believable, but for my own in-universe explanation, for my own personal enjoyment of the text, the way I'm choosing to integrate 10 into the whole is by imagining it's a dreamscape, some sort of collective fantasy or nightmare, depending on whether you're a Greek or a Trojan. With all the doubt about how Homeric Book 10 is, and despite my numerous complaints about its style, it is one of my very favorite books, one I always look forward to reading. As we go along, I'll talk a little more about what I appreciate about this unique episode, regardless of who wrote it or when. We're about to move into the scene where Diomedes and Odysseus gear up for their nighttime raid on the Trojan camp. As they were sent out here beyond the fortifications to discuss Nestor's plan, they didn't each bring all the things they would need, and certainly not the specialized gear that a secretive mission like this would call for. Fortunately, their friends brought various other weapons and armor along, so the raid equipment is at hand. The gear they're given to use, especially one particular piece handed to Odysseus, is especially fascinating. And I'll tell you right now, I'm going to go off into a few tangents just because of this one piece of gear. It is worth it, because we'll not only learn the fascinating history of this item, we'll also veer off towards Odysseus's famous grandfather, and it will lead us into the secret theme of Book 10, concealed identities, the animal hidden within us all, and werewolves. Oh my, we're going to be learning about Bronze Age werewolves. Now, let's return briefly to Odysseus and Diomedes, standing outside the Greek fortifications as they gear up for their nighttime raid on the Trojan camp. To the son of Tydeus did Thrasymedes, steadfast in war, give a two-edged sword, for his own was left by his ship, and a shield, and about his head set a helm of bull's hide, without cone or crest, that is called a skull cap, and keeps the heads of stalwart youths. And Meriones gave Odysseus a bow and a quiver, and a sword, and on his head set a helm made of leather, and with many a thong it was stiffly wrought within, while without the white teeth of a boar of flashing tusks were arrayed thick set on either side, well and cunningly, and in the midst was fixed a cap of felt. This casque Autolycos once stole from Amyntor, son of Ormenos, out of Eleon, breaking into his well-builded house. And he gave it to Amphidamas of Cythera to take to Scandia, and Amphidamas gave it for a guest gift to Molos, who gave it to his own son Meriones to wear, and now it was set to cover the head of Odysseus. Diomedes and Odysseus gear up now for their adventure. We'll focus on Diomedes first, who had already brought with him his spear and his lion skin cloak. If only Nestor's plan had been discussed back in the camp where all their stuff is, not out here on the plain, we wouldn't need this grab bag gearing up scene where they look at whatever gear people randomly brought out here to share and share alike until our heroes are adequately equipped. Thrasymedes gives Diomedes a sword because he'd left his own at the ship, and a leather cap made of bull's hide. This cap, called in the original Greek text a kataitux, was of an ancient style not well remembered in the classical period. And even the scholars of ancient times were a bit stumped by this obscure word. The phrase translated here as without crest or cone, or perhaps more accurately translated by Lattimore, neither horn nor crest, is a bit of poetic alliteration in the original Greek. Aphalon te kai alophon, which was a lovely way of saying he's wearing a simple leather cap with none of the ornamentation a man of his stature would normally affect. Is the author positing some connection between Diomedes and a bull with this cap? Perhaps, but the point isn't dwelled upon, so I won't either, and will suffice it to posit that the bull was of course considered a ferocious animal, and a liminal animal in that it was domesticated and yet still threatening. And I'll go out on a bit of a limb and say that the ancient audience might be reminded by this bull's hide cap of the bull of Minos, the minotaur of the labyrinth at Knossos, who stalked a dark realm looking for prey. What you'll note in the armor both men are going to wear on this raid is that it's light on metal. They want to avoid the clinking and the glinting. It's a stealth mission tonight. Meriones gives Odysseus a sword, a bow, and a quiver presumably full of arrows, and a helmet made of boar's tusks that gets a very lengthy description, which we will discuss in more detail in just a moment, once I've talked about the bow first. The bow of Odysseus, which is not this one Meriones has given him now. This is a loner bow. The bow that Odysseus already owns, but which is currently carefully stowed away back home in his palace on the island of Ithaca. That bow will eventually become what Odysseus uses to not only prove his identity after being away for 20 years, but also to cleanse his home of interlopers. Presumably, he left it at home because in the Trojan War, other than this one nighttime raid, Odysseus presents himself as a forefront fighter who was greatly honored for his one-on-one combat skills, and to a lesser extent possibly because his bow was perhaps better suited for hunting than battle. Meriones giving him a bow here makes a little bit of sense, as it's a weapon that could be used from a place of concealment. And given this will be a secretive mission into enemy territory, there will be some need for hiding. But it's nighttime, very late at night, in fact, when the campfires have burned down to embers. So it's hard to imagine there will be enough light for effective archery. Most likely, the bow here serves mostly as a bit of foreshadowing to the much later events I've alluded to in the Odyssey. It also serves as a callback to events in Odysseus's family history, which we'll explore shortly as we track the history of the boar's tusk helmet. So let's move on now from the bow to that boar's tusk helmet, which is, for me, it's up there with the necklace of Harmonia as far as fascinating mythological objects goes. Ones with intricate histories of ownership, plenty of room for speculation on just what powers the objects could bestow, and to just wonder what eventually became of them. Like the bow, this boar's tusk helmet has a strong connection with Odysseus's family history. Homer provides not only a description of the helmet itself, but also a history of its ownership, which Wilcock elaborates on. It belonged first to Amyntor, son of Ormenos, and the father of the very same Phoenix whom we just met in Book 9. The helmet was then stolen away from Phoenix's father by Odysseus's maternal grandfather, Autolycos, who later gave it to Amphidamas of Cythera as a token of friendship. Amphidamas eventually gave it to a Cretan, Molos, marking another important friendship. When Molos' son Meriones went off to the Trojan War, he gave it to his son, not without any notion that it would be useful in battle necessarily, but rather intending for his son to seal some important friendship of his own with it. Surprisingly, however, Meriones has not only managed to find a way to seal a friendship with this by now ancient helmet, and to place it in the hands of someone who could actually use it right now for a real military purpose, since it's, again, not made of metal and won't clink or glint on this secret nighttime mission. In a way, Meriones has helped the boar's tusk helmet come full circle, back into the hands of Autolycus' heir. This whole history shows how an object of value might travel in the Mycenaean world through the system of guest friendship. I'll give you my own description of this object for you to elaborate on the one Homer has provided, but I also want to make you aware that there are photos online, including one linked in the show notes, that I encourage you to take a look at. And I do mean photos, not artist renderings or recreation. There are actual photos of real Bronze Age boar's tusk helmets, which have been found by archaeologists. Could one of these be the actual helmet of Odysseus? Okay, that's far-fetched, History Channel style wackiness, but it is fun to pretend. So what you'll see in these photos, and what we're to imagine according to Homer, is a conical helmet composed of boar's tusks arranged in rows. I'm reading online that wild boar's tusks vary in length and can be up to 18 inches long, but to make this helmet, the tusks were all cut into flat plates of equal size. 4 holes have been drilled into each plate, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, which were used to sew the plates onto a felt cap. And of course, the felt caps have not survived the centuries, but the tusks have. It's estimated to have taken from 40 to 50 boars to make such a cap. Therefore, these helmets would always have been rare and valuable, the result of numerous large-scale hunting parties representing not only the gathering and commanding of many men, but also the courage it took for these men to face down such dangerous animals in the wild. I'm not a hunter myself, and I don't want to get dragged down into a defense of the ethics of the ancestors of these Bronze Age characters engaging in such hunting versus our own modern opinions, especially in the context of a podcast about a mostly fictional story. So instead, let's note that in their cultural context, the labor and bravery such a helmet would have represented would have made an object like this a significant status symbol. Of course, such a helmet would have been an heirloom within a family, or used as a gift to mark some important friendships. And indeed, Homer's description includes such an ownership history. The exquisite detail of Homer's description of the helmet itself serves as proof of the Iliad's great age. Helmets like this were not only out of style, but likely completely forgotten by the time of the Iliad's composition other than this one reference, and so couldn't have been added by Homer or the author, whatever we name him, of the Iliad in the 8th century, much less by the compilers of the Iliad in 6th century Athens. But the retention of this detailed description in the oral history became relevant once modern day archaeologists actually found some of these helmets at ancient sites, including at Mycenae, the traditional site from which Agamemnon rules. Wilcock writes, "It is virtually certain that nobody can have seen an actual example of it in Homer's day, and that the detailed description here had been preserved in the poetic tradition. So crucial, this helmet, its accurate description here in the Iliad, written by someone who simply couldn't have seen one, but was writing down what had been passed down in the oral storytelling tradition for generations. When examples of this helmet were discovered by archaeologists in modern times, Homer's description served as evidence that the Iliad was based on incredibly ancient oral stories." We know the author of Book 10 is saying something about each character by the choice of animal wear. So what does wearing a boar's tusk helmet say to us about Odysseus? For one thing, the boar was something of a liminal animal to the ancients as well, both in that it resembled the domestic pig, which was kept by the ancient Greeks, but also in that the hunting of a wild boar was a test of manhood, a way for a youth to prove his bravery and move from childhood into manhood. In Book 19 of the Odyssey, Odysseus' own scar from his youthful boar hunt is revealed, as well as the story that it was obtained when he was visiting none other than his grandfather Autolycos. In addition to representing this space between places, the boar was also seen as an extremely violent animal. Author Olga Levaniok, in her work Eve of the Festival, Making Myth in Odyssey 19, uses the phrase uncompromising aggression to describe the boar. This was certainly a way the ancients saw the boar: hunted, cornered, being pursued by a group of men and their dogs. The boar was a fierce animal to face, but they also saw the boar as something that could lay concealed, its aggression held at bay, ready to burst forth from hiding at the opportune moment. All of this will be true for Odysseus in this book. Our tangent continues. We've talked about the special gear for this secret mission, and we'll move shortly into the secret theme of Book 10. But first, let's discuss the man that brings these two together, Autolycos, whose name means the wolf itself. As mentioned, Autolycos was Odysseus' maternal grandfather, an underappreciated character in Greek mythology, and the multiple subtle connections to him here in Book 10 show a deft hand on the part of the author. As clumsy as this writer may be with characterizations, they have a firm grasp on the mythological concepts at play and are giving us a whole lot to work with here. Autolycos was a famous thief who briefly owned the very boar's tusk helmet Odysseus is putting on right now, before giving it to his friend Amphidamas. And that bow Odysseus has back at home has a connection to Autolycos as well, in a convoluted story involving Heracles and Heracles' friend Iphitus, who were out searching for some lost cattle that Iphitus had been blamed for stealing. During their search for the missing cattle, Heracles and Iphitus came across Odysseus. Iphitus and Odysseus became good friends, and Iphitus sealed that friendship with the gift of the famous bow of Odysseus, which, as of the events of Book 10, as we said, is currently carefully stored away back at Odysseus' palace on the island of Ithaca, awaiting his return home many years from now. But what Iphitus and Heracles, or Odysseus for that matter, didn't know at the time is that it was Autolycos who had stolen those cattle, whose theft had sent them searching the wilderness for the cattle or for their thief, who would himself escape blameless for this and for his many other thefts. Old Grandpa Autolycos lived a long life and kept up his thieving ways to a ripe old age. To get at what a mythological character represents, it helps to look at who their parents were. There's confusion online about Autolycos' parentage, and I spent a good deal of time picking through different stories and referring to the primary texts to get his story as straight as possible. Here we go. Autolycos was the son of the god Hermes himself in all sources except one. In Pausanias, his father was a mortal man named Daedalion, misspelled Baedalion in a number of English translations, but clearly Daedalion in the original Greek, as beta and delta look very different, even if they make similar sounds. As for attributing Autolycus' parentage to this mortal rather than to Hermes like everyone else, Pausanias' main goal was not as a mythographer, but rather as a travel writer. And at this point, he's recounting stories heard from locals in Arcadia, the home of some myths and religious rites about wolves and werewolves. The connection is with a character like Autolycus, who is himself associated with the wolf. As a side note, don't be fooled by Wikipedia listing Apollodorus as being in agreement with Pausanias that Autolycus' father was Daedalion. The name Daedalion or Baedalion doesn't appear at all in the works of Apollodorus. So Pausanias is alone among ancient writers in this assertion. Autolycus' mother varied from source to source. Across 6 surviving sources, there are 3 different mothers given, 2 by each author. The candidates for Autolycus' mother are Chione, Philonis, and Talauge. However, mythographer Hyginus implies that Chione and Philonis are one and the same person, writing, "They say that both Apollo and Mercury slept with Chione. Other poets call her Philonis, daughter of Daedalion, on the same night. She bore Philemon to Apollo and Autolycus to Mercury." Of course, Mercury is the Roman name of Hermes. I'm using this as a tiebreaker, merging the names Chione and Philonis on the authority of Hyginus and giving the win to Chione/Philonis as mother of Autolycus. Chione's father was Daedalion, likely resulting in Pausanias' confusion. Daedalion was the son of either the morning star Phosphorus or the evening star Hesperos. So once we've waded through the typos and various other confusions, we've established Autolycus' parentage very clearly in my mind as being the son of the god Hermes and the granddaughter of the morning or evening star, making him a person of remarkable lineage. One of those early characters who was not clearly delineated as either a mortal or a god from those early days when everyone was heroic and everything done was monumental and important because it was all being done for the first time. The heroic age, of which our current protagonists, such as Odysseus, form a part, are from the later transitional time when the gods were reevaluating their relationship with mortals and moving toward the distance that existed for the ancient Greeks in historical times. Characters from that earlier time, like Autolycus, could be something like human replicas of their divine parents, engaging in the same kind of behavior and in a way embodying some aspects of their divine parents. In Autolycus' case, it was the trickster aspects of Hermes, not a side of Hermes we think about much now, who he was embodying. A casual glance at Greek mythology reveals Hermes to be, yes, the messenger of the gods. Sure, that's true. And dig a little deeper, and we find that he's the psychopomp. What a great word, meaning he escorts souls to the afterlife. But like all the major Greek gods, Hermes has got so many sides to him. As an infant, Hermes stole cattle from his brother Apollo as a baby. And in this story, I won't give the whole story, but there are some wonderful, clever details as to how Hermes concealed his theft. Things like tying brooms to the cows' tails to sweep their tracks clean at one point, or making them walk backward to reverse the way their tracks appear to lead. Very Odysseus-like tricks, which clearly run in the family. Undoubtedly, there were originally more thief and trickster stories about Hermes, but this is the primary one cited that we still have today to emphasize this aspect of him. Here are a few more important facts to know about Autolycus. Hermes gave his son Autolycus a special skill to aid him as a thief, the ability to change the form of whatever he stole, making it unrecognizable to those he stole it from. Next, one source puts forth that Autolycus' own wife was a shapeshifter, Mestra. However, Mestra only appears in Ovid, who is a late Roman source. Amphitheia is the wife of Autolycus and grandmother of Odysseus in Homer. Autolycus was asked to name his grandson, Rather than thinking about the task at hand, however, the old thief must have been ruminating on the grievances of his long life of adventures, of theft and trickery, pursuit and escape. I can picture him, elderly Autolycos, gray with age, but still wiry and always on alert. He's holding the infant Odysseus, and although his face is directed toward the child, he's looking through his grandson, thinking about something else, clearly not in the present moment, when he mutters, "Since I have been angered with many people, both men and women, let his name be Odysseus." This is, to put it mildly, an unusual thing to name a child, for it means I have been angered. But he was the grandfather, and the name stuck. Autolycos, the wolf itself, embodiment of Hermes' trickster/thief aspect, is himself the primal prototype for Odysseus, his more refined grandson, whose cunning is less of the mischievous nature of his grandfather and more purpose-driven, harnessed for the use of his community. However, the family resemblance is there. Autolycos leads us directly into the secret theme of Book 10, the wolf, concealed identities, the animal hidden within us all, and werewolves. We have our own modern cultural associations with the wolf, what they mean to us, how they appear in our stories. The ancients, too, had their conceptions about wolves, which were largely similar to our own, not surprising since our ideas likely are the cultural descendants of theirs. In some ways, however, their ideas differ from ours. They did live much closer to nature than most of us do now, and had not only more opportunities to observe wild animals like wolves, but also to be impacted by them. The ancients were not always passive appreciators of the natural world, but victims of predators like wolves, who might steal away their farm animals, which represented an important form of wealth for people of the Bronze Age. So let's talk a little bit about what wolves meant to the ancient Greeks and how this wolf theme weaves itself through Book 10. We'll reflect on how this theme already made some appearances, and we'll become aware of how the themes of theft, duplicity, and uncertain identities will become even more prominent as we enter into the second half of this book, because it's through this theme and its application to mythological concepts that Book 10 really shines. We could pick through the text looking for defects of characterization and subtle errors and bum ourselves out, but we'd be missing the real work that 10's author put into this wonderful, if weird, contribution to the Iliad. Wolves in ancient Greek literature had complex associations, but they were mostly negative. Wolves were seen as ruthless hunters and thieves. Wolves are social, and yet also seen as being antisocial. Social in that they travel in a pack and seem to have some level of hierarchy like we do, but antisocial as it was believed by the ancients that in the frenzy of killing, wolves were likely to turn on one another, even becoming cannibalistic in the frenzy of a hunt, killing and eating not only their prey, but even one another as well. There is also an aspect of doubt as to their identity. They were an unstable society of indistinguishable individuals. To ancient observers, wolves all looked the same, and it was imagined that wolves would have the same difficulty of distinguishing wolf friend from wolf foe that the ancient human observers of wolves had. A sense of doubt surrounding the identity of wolves may persist to the modern day with the saying, "a wolf in sheep's clothing." The similarity of wolves to dogs wasn't lost on the ancients, even if they didn't know the history of dogs having been domesticated from wolves, which we've been able to piece together from archaeology and DNA evidence. To ancient people who were protecting their herds with the assistance of dogs, animals that seemed very similar to their wild predatory competitors, the wolves, this must have added to the sense that wolves could turn, that their integrity was in doubt. Of course, this theme, a questioning of identity, has already been presented to us in the repetitive use of animal skin clothing here in Book 10. Like the wolf in sheep's clothing, is Agamemnon a man or is he a lion? Is Diomedes his subordinate king, or equal in prestige, another lion, because of his prowess in nearly single-handedly keeping the Greeks in the fight up until recently? Why is Nestor alone among the major characters in not wearing some clothing which telegraphs his identity? Do the author's reasons for each of these decisions differ for each man, especially given the care and attention given to calling up the duplicitous ancestry of Odysseus? Book 10's author wants us to be thinking about these questions, if not consciously, as I've made it inevitable for us to be doing now, but then certainly subconsciously, as we enter now into the nighttime raid portion of Book 10. So when these twain had harnessed them in their dread armor, they set forth to go, and left there all the best of the host. And to them did Pallas Athene send forth an omen on the right, a heron hard by the way, and they beheld it not with their eyes through the dark night, but they heard its shrill cry. And Odysseus was glad in the omen of the bird, and prayed to Athene, Listen to me, thou child of Aegis-bearing Zeus, that ever in all toils dost stand by me, nor doth any motion of mine escape thee. But now again, above all, be thou friendly to me, Athene, and grant that we come back with renown to the ships, having wrought a great work, that shall be sorrow to the Trojans. Now that Diomedes and Odysseus are geared up for their mission, they set out into the night on their stealthy, desperate mission to bring hope to the Greeks, confusion and dismay to the Trojans, and maybe take home a little loot, who knows? Passing silently through the darkness, they hear a heron calling out from their right, a good sign, and Odysseus prays quietly to Athene. This is an unusual bird to use as an omen, but it's not entirely unknown for a heron to be used in this way. And like so many other references to animals in Book 10, it has symbolic importance. Ancient Scholia notes indicate that the ancients saw the heron as an ambush hunter, silently waiting for its prey in marshy places, not unlike the river bottomlands Odysseus and Diomedes are entering now. Next again prayed Diomedes of the loud war cry, Listen now likewise to me, thou child of Zeus, unwearied maiden, and follow with me, as when with my father thou didst follow, even noble Tydeus, into Thebes, when he went forth as a messenger from the Achaeans. And them he left by the Asopos, the mail-clad Achaeans, and a honeyed word he bare to the Cadmeans in that place. But on his backward way he devised right terrible deeds with thee, fair goddess, for eager didst thou stand by him. Even so now stand thou by me willingly, and protect me. And to thee will I sacrifice a yearling heifer, broad of brow, unbroken, that never yet hath man led below the yoke. Her will I sacrifice to thee, and gild her horns with gold. Diomedes then also prays to Athene. In his prayer, Diomedes references a time when his father Tydeus fought many Thebans alone, but Athene protected Tydeus and he emerged victorious. Diomedes asks that she do the same for him, now that he's about to face many opponents with only a single ally. And if she does protect him and he survives this night, he'll sacrifice a cow to her, one that he's put gold leaf on the horns of. Fancy. So spake they in their prayer, and Pallas Athene heard them. And when they had prayed to the daughter of mighty Zeus, they went forth on their way, like two lions, through the dark night, amid the slaughter, amid the slain men, through the arms and the black blood. After Diomedes' prayer, he and Odysseus continue on into the night like two prowling lions, crossing the battlefield strewn with the bodies of the slain, the weapons and armor laying about, the ground dark with blood. We now shift our attention to the Trojans, because they are not all asleep, resting after the previous day's victory and confident of tomorrow's final defeat of the Greeks. Hector is awake, restless, like Agamemnon. Is Hector worried like Agamemnon? No, I don't think so. He's electrified, confident. After 10 long years of war, an interminable siege of his city, and the vagaries of the gods, how could Hector be confident of anything? If we know Hector and his one weakness, pride, he indeed could be so confident. At the heart of the Trojan camp, we now find Hector calling together his chiefs to discuss their next steps. Nay, nor the stout-hearted Trojans did Hector suffer to sleep, but he called together all the best of them, all that were chiefs and leaders of the Trojans. Them did he call together, and contrived a crafty counsel. Who is there that would promise and perform for me this deed for a great gift? Yea, his reward shall be sufficient. For I will give him a chariot, and 2 horses of arching neck, the best that be at the swift ships of the Achaeans, to whosoever shall dare the deed, and for himself shall win glory. And the deed is this, to go near the swift-faring ships, and seek out whether the ships are guarded as of old, or whether already, being subdued beneath our hands, the foes are devising a flight among themselves, and have no care to watch through the night, being fordone with dread weariness. So spake he. Hector has the same plan that Nestor came up with, and announces to the gathered Trojans that he wants a volunteer to spy on the enemy, and specifically to see if the Greeks look like they're getting ready their boats to leave after yesterday's losses. Maybe they're not even keeping a watch, he thinks in his pride. Maybe they're so demoralized after how badly we thwomped them yesterday that they're all just frantically loading up their boats as fast as they can. Hey, if that's the case, I'm imagining Hector thinking, then our spy can run back and tell us, and we can fall on them unawares, finish them off easily, and nab all their great stuff. Hector promises the volunteer a prize, but not something he owns. No, Hector promises whoever volunteers that he'll give that man the best horses of the Greeks, although he does not specify which horses or whose these may be. This should be an attractive offer. Livestock was the primary measure of wealth, and horses were then, and continue to be for many centuries to come, a status symbol of the wealthy. But Hector is paying on credit. His mind has already leaped ahead to the part where they run up on the Greeks with their backs to the beach as they're loading up the ships. So confident is he that they're going to win in the morning. There will be some horse theft coming up, but like so many expectations in Book 10, there will be a twist. Hector has finished making his offer to the Trojan leadership. Volunteer to go alone and spy on the Greeks, and I'll give you what is quite possibly the single most valuable piece of loot in their entire camp. But they were all silent and held their peace. Now there was among the Trojans one Dolon, the son of Eumedes, the godlike herald, and he was rich in gold and rich in bronze. And verily he was ill-favored to look upon, but swift of foot. Now he was an only son among 5 sisters. So he spake then a word to the Trojans and to Hector. Hector, my heart and manful spirit urge me to go near the swift-faring ships and spy out all. But come, I pray thee, hold up thy staff, and swear to me that verily thou wilt give me the horses and the chariots bedight with bronze that bear the noble son of Peleus. But to thee I will prove no vain spy, nor disappoint thy hope. For I will go straight to the camp, until I may come to the ships of Agamemnon, where surely the chiefs are like to hold counsel, whether to fight or flee. So spake he. None of the Trojans volunteer to spy on the Greeks for Hector, and they're all quiet until Dolon speaks up. We haven't met him before, but he's the main antagonist of Book 10, and how this portion of the Iliad got the scholarly name Doloneia. The name Dolon means deceit, treachery. As the audience, this is what we're to expect from this character the moment we hear this name. The narrator also provides quite a bit of detail about him, all crammed into a few lines, which is intended to give us some further preconceived notions about Dolon. He's the son of a sacred herald. He's rich. He's ugly. He can run fast, and he has 5 sisters. The 5 sisters detail is to make us imagine that he was spoiled and doted over by his sisters, and not a more manly man who the audience would have expected if he had been raised among brothers to compete against him and make him tough. We're to think of Dolon as weak. Dolon is the only person other than Thersites in the whole of the Iliad to be called ugly. And Odysseus beat Thersites shamefully in front of the Greek leadership. Another thing we're likely to recall as Dolon is introduced to us. It all adds up to a character who we're supposed to see as unpleasant, greedy, underqualified for this mission, but not unqualified for it because he's fast. Fast is Dolon's one good quality. Hector does think this guy could possibly get in and out of the Greek camp. We're not to view Hector as having much confidence in Dolon, but maybe just enough to make Dolon taking on this mission marginally credible. Plus, Hector's got no other volunteers to choose from. So this dubious Dolon character volunteers to go, but then impudently requires Hector to lift his scepter and swear before Zeus that he really will give Dolon the horses of Achilles. Hector hadn't specified which horses from among the Greeks he was promising to give, but quite likely it was common knowledge even among the Trojans who within the Greek camp had the best horses, and Dolon here names Achilles' horses as those he wants in return for taking on this spy mission. Objectively, there is no doubt that Dolon is correct in his assessment, because the horses of Achilles were not just ordinary horses. They were immortal horses, whose mother was a harpy, a monstrous winged being, half human and half bird, who personified the wind. That particular harpy's name was Podarge, while their father was the god of the west wind himself, Zephyros. How a bird/woman monster and the west wind end up giving birth to horses isn't going to ever make any sense from a physical or genetics standpoint. Monsters in Greek mythology are only going to make their own kind of sense, a mythological sense, which in this case is speedy west wind plus wind symbolizing speedy flying monsters equals speedy immortal horse's offspring. For this nobody, this Dolan, to imagine himself driving the horses of Achilles, it takes gall. And Dolan's requiring Hector to swear, Hector, whom we know to be the most honorable man in this whole story. It's infuriating. Hector and Achilles are men so much better than Dolan. We're to feel outrage and anger at his impudence. Who will think of upholding the social order? We will, with our righteous anger. Dolan is someone who distrusts when he should trust, as we're seeing right now in his interaction with Hector, and trusts when he should distrust, as will be shown a bit later on. As for this talk of stealing Achilles' horses, it is, as with much the author of Book 10 does, setting us up for an ironic, alternate outcome later on. And Hector took his staff in his hand, and sware to him, Now let Zeus himself be witness, the loud thundering lord of Hera, that no other man of the Trojans shall mount those horses, but thou, I declare, shalt rejoice in them forever. So spake he, and sware a bootless oath thereto, and aroused Dolan to go. Hector should feel as outraged as we do at Dolan's gall, at such an unworthy man stepping forward for this mission, much less at being asked to swear an oath that he will uphold a promise he's already made. And I think Hector does feel this. I suspect Hector was doubtful about Dolan to start with, and it's here, when Dolan requires him to swear, that Hector loses all confidence in Dolan and resigns himself to sending this fool off to whatever fate has in store for him. But Hector does swear. Maybe he's just that desperate to find out if the Greeks are hurriedly packing their ships right now. Note how Hector words his oath. It's a bit sneaky, a little tricky, and it ends up being a promise he's able to keep. I'm not convinced that the translation offered by Lang, Leaf, and Myers we just heard conveys the full subtlety of Hector's promise, of why it's bootless, vain, ineffectual. So let's hear how Lattimore translates Hector's oath. Let Zeus, loud thundering lord of Hera, now be my witness himself, that no other man of the Trojans shall mount these horses, since I say they shall be utterly yours, and your glory. Hector vows before Zeus that no other Trojan will mount behind the horses of Achilles, and that's true as far as it goes. But nothing in this oath says that Dolan will get these horses either. It's a subtle foreshadowing. As for that last part, that the horses of Achilles will be utterly Dolan's and his glory, that's irony bordering upon the sarcastic. And straightway he cast on his shoulders his crooked bow, and did on thereover the skin of a grey wolf, and on his head the helm of a ferret skin, and took a sharp javelin, and went on his way to the ships from the host. But he was not like to come back from the ships and bring word to Hector. This is the brief gearing up sequence for Dolan. More specific animals being worn, and now we're ready for them and their freighted meanings. Dolan puts on a wolf skin cloak and a ferret skin cap. Dolan bears the symbolism of two animals, so we have quite a bit for us to unpack here. We're going to start with that ferret skin cap. The ancients were not as specific as modern biologists are when it comes to identifying species, so I'm left with some doubt as to exactly what animal we're to imagine Dolan's cap was made from. Our translator uses the word ferret, which I'm finding means specifically the domesticated version of the European polecat. In the original Greek, the word used was ichthys, which online ancient Greek dictionaries translate as the marten. Now, all three of these animals, ferrets, polecats, and martens, are weasels. Since the ancients weren't always that specific as to the differences between similar species, I don't think we need to be either. What we're to gather from Dolan wearing a weasel skin cap is that he's taking on some of the characteristics of the weasel, and I'm gathering that the ancients had some of the same associations with the weasel as we do now. There are even ancient scholia commenting on how this ferret cap was appropriate for Dolan as a weaselly person. This is absolutely fascinating to me, that even in ancient times they used this same animal as a way of describing human behavior that's cunning, sneaky, deceptive, with a view towards evading responsibility. We haven't seen an aspect of evading responsibility in Dolan's character yet. So far he comes across as cunning and sneaky, certainly, and to that extent he's well matched against his opponent Odysseus. But unlike Odysseus, whose cunning mind extends to his understanding of others, Dolan has already displayed poor judgment in his mistrust of Hector, that most trustworthy of men. Dolan's cunning so far has been to step forward for a chance at profit when his comrades didn't. Let's be on the lookout for any further displays of cunning, and for signs of him evading responsibility, as this weasel comparison suggests. Dolan donning a weasel is where he becomes fully a tragicomic character, the Iliad's Punchinello. As for the wolfskin cloak, all of Book 10 has a wolf theme, and our primary antagonist putting on the guise of a wolf should come as no surprise. In Dolan's case, I'm interpreting his wolfishness as being emblematic of a disguised identity. But also, he's a mercenary character who's out for his own self-interest. Let's see if Dolan remains loyal to Hector, or if he displays that tendency to turn on one's allies that the ancients saw in the wolf. In addition to his animal clothing, Dolan carries weapons, of course, a bow and a javelin, as he sets out into the night. Both Dolan on his side and Diomedes and Odysseus on their side are spying, seeking to keep their presence and identities unknown, wolves hunting in the night. But when he had left the throng of men and horses, he went forth eagerly on the way, and Odysseus of the seat of Zeus was ware of him as he approached. It did not take long for Odysseus to spot Dolan. The hunt is over already. I feel like the writer could have dragged this out a bit. Had Dolan sneaking around in the night, maybe shown him cowering in fear before realizing that it's another Trojan he's hearing, sighing in relief, some minor adventures like that. I would have enjoyed a little more of Dolan stumbling around ineptly, but no, Dolan is immediately noticed by Odysseus. There's no time elapsed at all. Within the same breath, we're told he sets out and that he's spotted. So that's a little disappointing, but note that Odysseus is aware of Dolan. But Dolan is not aware of Odysseus. This gives Odysseus the opportunity to play around with his victim, a cat who's caught a mouse, and we won't be disappointed with these results. With the advantage of secrecy and surprise, Odysseus comes up with a very Odysseus plan. He whispers to Diomedes, "Lo, here is some man, Diomedes, coming from the camp. I know not whether as a spy to our ships, or to strip certain of the dead men fallen. But let us suffer him to pass us by a little way on the plain, and thereafter let us rush on him, and take him speedily. And if it chance that he outrun us by speed of foot, ever do thou hem him in towards the ships, and away from the camp, rushing on him with thy spear, lest in any wise he escape towards the city." So they spake. Odysseus' plan is subtle and sneaky, letting the hunter become the hunted. He and Diomedes are going to let Dolan slip past them and continue on toward the Greek camp, while they will secretly follow Dolan. Once Odysseus and Diomedes are between Dolan and the Trojans, and Dolan is much too close to the Greek camp to hope for any help from the Trojans, the two of them will rush him with their spears. If Dolan happens to get ahead of them, that's okay, because they can herd him towards the ships. They're spies, spying on another spy. Those who set out first now become the followers, reversing the roles. This is exactly why I love this episode, and there's nothing else like it in the Iliad. Obviously, very non-heroic, but a fun break from the standard battles, and in the exact moment when Odysseus' particular type of intelligence would be most useful, he's absolutely brilliant. Turning out of the path, they lay down among the bodies of the dead, and swiftly Dolan ran past them in his witlessness. But when he was as far off as is the length of the furrow made by mules, for better far are they than kine, to drag the jointed plough through the deep fallow, these twain ran after him, and he stood still when he heard the sound, supposing in his heart that they were friends come from among the Trojans to turn him back at the countermand of Hector. But when they were about a spear cast off, or even less, he knew them for foemen, and stirred his swift limbs to fly, and speedily they started in pursuit. Odysseus and Diomedes have to commit to their plan now, because Dolon is approaching them swiftly and will see them if they don't act. They hide by lying on the ground, among the countless dead left out from yesterday's battle, silently imitating the fallen. And Dolon falls for it, doesn't notice them, passes them by, and continues towards the Greek camp. The next step is important. They want to follow him, closely enough that they don't lose track of him, but not so closely that he hears he's being followed. It's hard for us to make sense of these archaic agrarian distances Homer uses to describe the scene. Homer says Dolon gets as far ahead of them as a furrow plowed by a mule, which are not as good as oxen, although it's not made clear whether a mule furrow is a different distance than an ox one or just not plowed as well. Not helpful, Homer. I did a little reading and found we could estimate Odysseus and Diomedes follow Dolon once he's gotten about 100 feet past them. That's about 30 meters for our metric friends. As they get closer, Dolon hears their footsteps and stops, hoping he's hearing fellow Trojans come to tell him to come back. Maybe Hector's decided to call off this spying thing after all. But as they get closer, something tips him off. His instincts aren't all bad, and he realizes they're Greeks coming up behind him in the dark. Dolon runs, but he can't run back to the Trojans. That's the direction his pursuers are coming from. He's been cut off from his allies. Dolon can only run towards the Greek camp. Odysseus and Diomedes sprint after him, and the chase is on. And as when two sharp-toothed hounds, well skilled in the chase, press ever hard on a doe or a hare through the wooded land, and it runs screaming before them, even so Tydeus' son and Odysseus, the sacker of cities, cut Dolon off from the host, and ever pursued hard after him. But when he was just about to come among the sentinels, in his flight towards the ships, then Athene poured strength into the son of Tydeus, that none of the mail-clad Achaeans might boast himself the first to smite, and he come second. And strong Diomedes leaped upon him with the spear. As Dolon is running headlong toward the Greek camp and the sentries at the wall, he's trapped. His fate has already been sealed. What has not been determined is who will get the glory of this capture, the pursuers or the posted Greek guards. With two favorites of Athene on the field, both of whom made proper prayers and promises of future sacrifices, my money is on one of the pursuers. Athene puts strength into Diomedes to give him the glory of capturing Dolon rather than some minor sentry character. That promise of a gold-plated cow he made to her is about to pay off. With a burst of speed, Diomedes comes within striking range and shouts at Dolon, "Stand! Or I shall overtake thee with the spear, and methinks that thou shalt not long avoid sheer destruction at my hand." So spake he, and threw his spear, but of his own will he missed the man, and passing over his right shoulder, the point of the polished spear stuck fast in the ground, and Dolon stood still, in great dread and trembling, and the teeth chattered in his mouth, and he was green with fear. Then the twain came up with him, panting, and gripped his hands, and weeping he spake, "Take me alive, and I will ransom myself. For within our house there is bronze, and gold, and smithied iron, wherefrom my father would do you grace with ransom untold, if he should learn that I am alive among the ships of the Achaeans." Diomedes immediately backs up his command with his spear, not waiting to see whether or not Dolon complies. He launches his spear, intentionally just missing Dolon's head. The spear shoots over Dolon's shoulder. The rush of its air and the roar of its rushing past his ear surely sent a chilling sensation down his spine, putting overwhelming fear into Dolon's heart. The spear sticks in the ground ahead of Dolon, marking an end to his flight. Diomedes and Odysseus catch up. Dolon is frozen in place, shaking with fear, his teeth chattering like some pathetic character in a slapstick comedy, before breaking into tears and saying, "Take me prisoner, don't kill me. My father is wealthy and will pay you a ransom for my life." This from the guy who promised Hector he would prove no vain spy and would not disappoint Hector's hope. Oh my, Dolon, you're just as cartoonishly cowardly as the narrator led us to believe. Let the attempts at weaseling out of this begin. Then Odysseus of the many counsels answered him and said, "Take courage, let not death be in thy mind. But come, speak, and tell me truly all the tale. Why thus from the host dost thou come all alone among the ships, through the black night, when other mortals are sleeping? Comest thou to strip certain of the dead men fallen? Or did Hector send thee forth to spy out everything at the hollow ships? Or did thine own spirit urge thee on? Odysseus is cold and calculating within his heart as he becomes an interrogator, playing good cop to the bad cop spear-throwing Diomedes. Outwardly, however, Odysseus seems reassuring, telling Dolon that they're not going to kill him. "Let not death be in thy mind," he says. "We just want to know why you're out here among the dead, alone, at night. Are you looting the bodies of the fallen? Did you come out here of your own free will, or did Hector send you to spy on the Greeks?" To foolish Dolon, Odysseus comes off as firm but comforting, and the opportunity Odysseus offers to pin the blame on Hector for his presence here gives Dolon an out. "We know better," Odysseus is implying to Dolon. "We know this isn't your fault. It's Hector's fault, you poor thing. Tell me all about that bad man, Hector, who put you up to this." You and I know that when Odysseus says to his enemy, "Let not death be in thy mind," death should be in thy mind. Wily Odysseus, descendant of legendary tricksters Autolycos and Hermes himself. But Dolon doesn't know Odysseus like we do. How will Dolon respond? "With many a blind hope did Hector lead my wits astray, who vowed that he would give me the whole hooved horses of the son of Peleus, and his car bedight with bronze, and he bade me fare through the swift black night, and draw nigh the foemen, and seek out whether the swift ships are guarded as of old, or whether already, being subdued beneath our hands, they are devising a flight among themselves, and have no care to watch through the night, being fordone with dread weariness." Dolon immediately sells Hector out, putting all the blame for this ill-fated mission onto the Trojan commander. Hector made this offer to all the Trojans, only vowed to Dolon at Dolon's insistence, and Dolon was simply the only one whose greed overcame the better instincts for self-preservation, which all the other Trojans obeyed. Odysseus was right to play on this character weakness. This was the loose cord to unravel the knot. "Hector seduced me," Dolon says, "with the promise of those great horses and the chariot of Achilles. With blind hopes was I led astray. It's not my fault. Hector sent me to spy on you, to see if you're still on guard or worn out from yesterday, to try to overhear your plans and whether you're talking about sailing away for Greece after your defeat today. Don't blame me, blame Hector." And smiling thereat, did Odysseus of the many counsels make him answer, "Verily now thy soul was set on great rewards, even the horses of the wise son of Iacchos. But hard are they for mortal men to master, and hard to drive, for any but Achilles only, whom a deathless mother bare. But come, tell me all this truly, all the tale. Where, when thou camest hither, didst thou leave Hector, shepherd of the host? And where lie his warlike gear? And where his horses? And how are disposed the watches and the beds of the other Trojans? And what counsel take they among themselves? Are they fain to abide there nigh the ships, afar from the city? Or will they return to the city again, seeing that they have subdued unto them the Achaeans?" Odysseus rewards Dolon with a smile. Is this reassuring to Dolon? It shouldn't be. Odysseus smiling, that's an ominous image to those of us who know him. Dolon is unfortunately either too unfamiliar with Odysseus to know what that smile means, or too desperate to do anything but hope it's genuine. In many other interactions between Greeks and Trojans throughout the Iliad, there's already some familiarity between the opponents. They've met or at least heard of one another's reputations. In this case, with the enclosed, dreamlike nature of Book 10, Dolon is an enigma. His first and only appearance is here, and he neither shows any knowledge of his Greek opponents, nor do Odysseus or Diomedes display any indication that they know of Dolon. This is unusual in the Iliad, and this lack of information about one's opponents makes this scene far more interesting than it would be otherwise. We, as the audience, know Odysseus. We, the audience, know he's wily Odysseus. And while Dolon's name means deceit, it's Odysseus who is now deceiving the deceiver. And Odysseus is rarely happier than when he can conceal his true motives while pulling off some subtle plan. We know his smile means Odysseus sees he's already won. Now it's just the cat playing with the mouse. Odysseus casts doubt on the thought of anyone but Achilles commanding those horses, which may make Dolon question Hector's intentions. Did Hector know I couldn't control the divine horses of Achilles? Was he mocking me? If Dolan suspected that Hector lacked confidence in his ability to complete this mission, he wouldn't have been far off the mark, and Odysseus poking at this sore spot would only serve to make Dolan even more likely to spill some useful military secrets. After sowing this seed of doubt, Odysseus continues asking Dolan questions about the arrangement of the Trojan camp, the whereabouts of Hector himself, the Trojan plans, a long sequence of questions. Odysseus plays into Dolan's sense of role confusion by presenting himself as a friend and gaining even more useful information. This guy is ready to become a fountain of information, and Odysseus is going to get as much out of him as possible. Then Dolan, son of Eumedes, made him answer again, Lo, now all these things will I recount to thee most truly. Hector with them that are counselors holdeth counsel by the barrow of godlike Elos, apart from the din. But as for the guards whereof thou asketh, O hero, no chosen watch nor guard keepeth the host. As for all the watchfires of the Trojans, on them is necessity, so that they watch and encourage each other to keep guard. But for the allies called from many lands, they are sleeping, and to the Trojans they leave it to keep watch. For nowise near dwell the children and wives of the allies. Dolan is quick to answer. He must think he's winning over Odysseus and securing his own future. Dolan reassures Odysseus that there's no real guard for the campfires of the Trojan allies. The Trojans themselves around their fires are keeping men in watch, but the allies are counting on the Trojans being watchful, since it's their families who are in the city. The allied nations don't have as much to fear the loss of here. Dolan is the true man of dubious identity in Book 10, a faithless ally of Hector, and an unwitting aid to the Greeks as he spills military secrets. In Dolan's eagerness to placate Odysseus, his actual enemy, he blames his commander Hector and gives valuable military intelligence to the Greeks. Odysseus now knows that the camp of the Trojan allies are left unguarded tonight, or rather the mini-camps of the various allied nations as they're spread across the plain, vulnerable. All the Trojan allies are too tired after yesterday's battles, too confident in the Greeks having been disheartened, too certain of tomorrow's victory to bother keeping watch. Interesting. Odysseus finds this all very interesting and wants Dolan to tell him more. Then Odysseus of the many councils answered him and said, How stands it now? Do they sleep amidst the horse-taming Trojans or apart? Tell me clearly that I may know. Pressing for more information about these sleeping, unwatchful allies, Odysseus asks, Who are they? Where are they? Are these unwatchful Trojan allies camping among the watchful Trojans or off on their own? Tell me clearly. I want details. Exactly where is everyone? Dolan's on a roll, thinking that he's clearly become valuable to this much nicer of his two Greek captors. I found a way to placate this Odysseus, Dolan thinks, friendly Odysseus, who seems far more likely to release me than the guy who launched a spear past my ear. Maybe I've even made a friend tonight. Wow, maybe he'll give me some valuable gift, a token of friendship, like that antique boar's tusk helmet he's wearing. Dolan certainly made himself valuable to Odysseus. Why not continue providing Odysseus information? It's Dolan's only way forward. Then answered him Dolan, son of Eumedes, Verily all this likewise will I recount to thee truly. Towards the sea lie the Carians, and the Paeonians of the bended bow, and the Leleges, and Caucones, and noble Pelasgoi. And towards Thymbrae the Lycians have their place, and the haughty Mysians, and the Phrygians that fight from chariots, and the Maeonians, lords of chariots. But wherefore do ye inquire of me thoroughly concerning all these things? For if ye desire to steal into the throng of Trojans, lo, there be those Thracians, newcomers, at the furthest point apart from the rest, and among them their king Rhesos, son of Ioneus. His be the fairest horses that ever I beheld, and the greatest, whiter than snow, and for speed like the winds. And his chariot is fashioned well with gold and silver, and golden is his armor that he brought with him, marvelous, a wonder to behold, such as it is in no wise fit for mortal man to bear, but for the deathless gods. But bring me now to the swift ships, or leave me here, when ye have bound me with a ruthless bond, that ye may go and make trial of me whether I have spoken to you truth or lies. Dolan now becomes an absolute font of knowledge, a geyser of Trojan military secrets. He eagerly gives Odysseus the locations of the various Trojan allies, where they're all camped, sleeping unguarded for the night, in precise detail. Dolan even mentions who among the Trojan allies has the most impressive horses, which would be the Thracians, and specifically their king Rhesos, whose horses are white as snow and swift like the wind, with a chariot of gold and silver, and he wears gold armor. Dolan still has horse theft on his mind, but you can start to see the ironic fulfillment of the author's intention with all this talk of horse theft. Dolan calls Rhesos and his Thracians newcomers, and from this we're to gather that they just arrived to join the war yesterday. This detail will be important soon. Dolan doesn't seem to realize the gravity of his situation, who he's fallen in with. He asks his Greek captors to either take him to the Greek camp or to leave him here bound while they go and verify that all he said is true. Dolan feels he's going through the formalities of the capture and ransom process that was common in warfare of the time, a game he's playing which his wealth can win for him. He thinks because he's rich, it will just be a matter of Odysseus verifying his claims, then upon Odysseus' return, the details of the ransom and release can be hammered out, with him released and home in time for breakfast. But that phase of the war is over, and neither of his captors, not Odysseus for all his seeming charm during this information-pumping phase of the interrogation, and certainly not Diomedes, who has very limited patience for any of this. Neither of our Greek protagonists in this tale are playing a game tonight, and the fun times are just about over for Dolan. Diomedes, patience drained now that Dolan's usefulness as a source of information is exhausted, says, "Put no thought of escape, Dolan, in thy heart, for all the good tidings that thou hast brought, since once thou hast come into our hands. For if now we release thee or let thee go, on some later day wilt thou come to the swift ships of the Achaeans, either to play the spy or to fight in open war. But if subdued beneath my hand, thou lose thy life, never again wilt thou prove a bane to the Argives." He spake, and that other with strong hand was about to touch his chin and implore his mercy. Now that they have the information they need, Odysseus' role as good cop keeping Dolan pliable is over, and Diomedes, the bad cop, is back, telling Dolan to forget about escaping. If we ransom you, you'll just end up coming back either as a spy or an opponent in battle. But if I kill you now, you'll never cause us trouble again. Odysseus is cunning, Diomedes is practical, and they're both eager to capitalize on the military secrets Dolan has provided them. Dolan's slow realization reaches the tragic end of his tragicomic arc, finally seeing how dire his situation is. In a dramatic gesture, he reaches out to touch Diomedes on the chin, the traditional gesture to beg for mercy, as he continues to plead for his life. But Diomedes smote him on the midst of the neck, rushing on him with the sword, and cut through both the sinews, and the head of him, still speaking, was mingled with the dust. Diomedes is not, and never was, going to be merciful. With a single stroke, Dolan's throat is cut, the sinews of the neck on either side severed, still speaking, pleading, as his head falls to the ground. Okay, that's still a little comic, but also tragic. Tragicomic Dolan is donezo. How do we feel about Diomedes right now? This act was sudden and cruel, maybe a bit criminal. It doesn't feel right, does it? Diomedes killing this poor dupe? We're getting into the morally ambiguous action of Book 10, an even darker cloud shrouding this dark night. Dolan has been said to be a kind of comic double for Achilles here in Book 10, in the same way that our other ugly person, Thersites, was in Book 1. Both these anti-heroes mirror some aspects of Achilles' role in the Iliad at these 2 points. In Book 1, Thersites launched a verbal attack on Agamemnon, which reflected much of the same things Achilles was saying about Agamemnon, and there Thersites was beaten by Odysseus for speaking out of turn, while Achilles didn't face the consequences of his actions. At least he didn't in Book 1, and still hasn't as of 10. Here in Book 10, Dolan's reflection of Achilles is a bit more complicated, but the parallelism is all the more compelling for it. Achilles' comrades Odysseus and Ajax had just learned in Book 9 of the depth of his refusal to participate in the war, even if it meant their death. Diomedes at the end of Book 9 wished they hadn't even sent that embassy to Achilles. It's Achilles' rejection of their pleading with him to save them that prompted this nighttime raid by Odysseus and Diomedes here in 10. While the other Greeks don't know that Achilles actively prayed for the Greeks to actually come to harm, they certainly know he's willing to let them die. Achilles made that very clear. Similarly, Dolon betrayed his comrades by ratting out the location of Rhesos and his amazing horses. With his death, Dolon, like Thersites before him, is an anti-hero mirror of Achilles, facing the consequences that Achilles isn't facing for his similar behavior. And they stripped him of the casque of ferret skin from off his head, and of his wolf skin, and his bended bow, and his long spear, and these to Athene, the giver of spoil, did noble Odysseus hold aloft in his hand. And he prayed and spake a word, Rejoice, O goddess, in these. For to thee, first of all the immortals in Olympus, will we call for aid. Nay, but yet again send us on against the horses and the sleeping places of the Thracian men. So spake he aloud, and lifted from him the spoils on high, and set them on a tamarisk bush, and raised thereon a mark right plain to see, gathering together reeds and luxurious shoots of tamarisk, lest they should miss the place, as they returned again through the swift dark night. They loot his corpse, and set Dolon's gear aside as an offering to Athene, hanging it from a tamarisk tree, with the reasoning given for this as being a way of marking the spot where they left it, so they'll be able to find it on their way back. Not sure that Athene would want a ferret skin cap, but the weapons are probably of some value. The two now continue into the night, off to attack the Trojan allies, since they learn that the allies have left their camps unguarded, while the Trojans themselves are keeping a watch. Remembering that most valuable piece of information they received from Dolon, the location of the Trojan allied Thracians, who have the best horses, this is where our protagonists are going next. Author Olga Merg-Davidson, in her paper Dolon and Rhesus in the Iliad, sheds some additional light on this strange activity of Odysseus and Diomedes of hanging the spoils from Dolon's killing on a tree, which brings our wolf theme sharply into focus. Sure, it made some sense for them to hang his clothing from a tree. That certainly would make it easy to find the loot once they're returning to the Greek camp from their further raiding adventures tonight. But it also doesn't make sense in that it's a signpost to the enemy that the Greeks are abroad, killing in the night. Davidson draws from two additional sources, the play by Euripides, which is traditionally titled Rhesus, and surviving myths from Arcadia about Zeus Lycaos, which means wolf Zeus, in what I suspect is the ancient precursor to our modern idea of the werewolf. In the play Rhesus, which recounts much of the same events as we're covering in Book 10, Dolon's mission is largely the same. But in Rhesus, Dolon is also out specifically for the head of Odysseus, in a delicious bit of irony that Euripides' audience surely delighted in. Davidson puts this together with the myths of Zeus Lycaos to fill out the mythological scenario for us. In the myths of Zeus Lycaos, the mortal man Lycaon was punished by Zeus for child sacrifice and cannibalism. Celebrants of his rites would gather at night once every 9 years, eating from a communal dish which contained one morsel of human flesh amidst more normal food, and whomever it was discovered had committed cannibalism would ceremonially hang their clothes up on a tree before leaving human society and taking up the life of a wolf in the wilderness. Later myths from the Roman period were even more explicitly connected to our modern ideas of werewolves. The author Petronius, in his work The Satyricon, tells the story of a man who removed his clothes as the final step in actually becoming a wolf. For Dolon, who donned the clothing of a wolf to assume an identity which was not his as he went up against those who were real nocturnal hunters, his story came to a quick and decisive end. Dolon's clothing being placed on this tree by Odysseus and Diomedes after their crime is undoubtedly a callback to those archaic rites in which men, having committed an unpardonable sin, shed their human identity to leave human society for that of the wolf. Let's now rejoin Odysseus and Diomedes as they stalk the night, approaching the camp of the sleeping Trojan allied nation, the Thracians, whom they believe to be keeping no watch and therefore presenting easy prey. So the twain went forward through the arms and the black blood, and quickly they came to the company of the Thracian men. Now they were slumbering, fordone with toil, but their goodly weapons lay by them on the ground, all orderly, in 3 rows, and by each man his pair of steeds. And Rhesos slept in the midst, and beside him his swift horses were bound with thongs to the topmost rim of the chariot. Him Odysseus spied from afar, and showed him unto Diomedes. Odysseus and Diomedes, following Dolon's directions, soon reach the Thracian camp. Dolon had told no lies, for all his other faults, and they find the Trojans all laying out, sleeping without a watch. In their midst is King Rhesos, with his glorious white horses and his golden chariot next to him. Odysseus whispers to Diomedes, "Lo, Diomedes, this is the man, and these are the horses whereof Dolon that we slew did give us tidings. But come now, put forth thy great strength. It does not behove thee to stand idle with thy weapons. Nay, loose the horses, or do thou slay the men, and of the horses will I take heed." Odysseus wants them to determine which of them is going to steal the horses, and which will go about killing the Thracians in their sleep. Note here Odysseus says, Dolon, that we slew, when it was in fact Diomedes who did the killing. Author George Stigakis, in his paper Dolon, Odysseus, and Diomedes in the Doloneia, goes into a whole discussion about why and how Odysseus here claims to have participated in the killing of Dolon, when it was clearly Diomedes who cut the guy's throat with his sword. Stigakis goes into more detail than we need concern ourselves with. The gist of his argument is that Odysseus is claiming to be what we would call an accessory to murder. This is important for us to recognize that they both bear a burden of sin. Both Diomedes and Odysseus will have to be cleansed of the crimes they have committed and will commit tonight. As Odysseus and Diomedes consider who's going to do the killing and who will finally get to our much anticipated horse theft, let's learn about this Rhesos, the Thracian king. He's got an interesting backstory, but it wouldn't fit into the scope of the Iliad, so there's been some very subtle and strategic editing by our much maligned Book 10 author to shoehorn Rhesos in without introducing an irreconcilable complication. To explain what I mean by this, let's return to Olga Merck Davidson and her paper Dolon and Rhesos in the Iliad, where, in addition to giving us those fascinating details about ancient werewolf legend, she also explores some of Rhesos' backstory, the myths that surround Rhesos in sources other than the Iliad, and what I feel is the very creative way the author of Book 10 integrates Rhesos into the Iliad without bringing in his disruptive backstory. She notes there are scholia about Rhesos, and of course there is an entire play about this character by the playwright Euripides, both of which give us Rhesos' backstory, which would have been known to Iliad audiences in ancient times. What we don't learn in the Iliad, but audiences in ancient times would have known about Rhesos, is that he'd received a prophecy promising him invincibility. All Rhesos had to do was drink from the water of the Scamander River, the river right here on the battlefield of Troy, and he would become unstoppable. As Rhesos and his Thracians had only just arrived to the war yesterday, we're to gasp at the implications of his presence here. Presumably, the main target this night for Diomedes and Odysseus, as they had set out, would have been Hector. And certainly Hector is set up quite obviously in this book as the clear counterpoint to the Greeks, sending his own spy Dolon out even as Nestor for the Greeks had sent Odysseus and Diomedes to spy upon his forces. But Athene had other plans, and the careful attention that both Diomedes and Odysseus paid to her and her proper worship is for this narrative purpose. Athene has deflected them from their assumed target Hector and directed them instead towards this unknown but more immediate threat, Rhesos. Because as Dolon pointed out in his futile attempt to placate his captors, Rhesos is a newcomer to the war, and while we don't know if Odysseus and Diomedes are aware of the prophecy that promises him invincibility, the audience surely would have, and upon hearing Dolon name Rhesos, the audience would have recognized the implied threat to the Greeks his presence poses. all he has to do is wake up in the morning, feel thirsty, go drink from the Scamander River, or more likely send a servant to get him river water to drink, since he's a king, and boom, invincible opponent for the Greeks to face. As Davidson points out, this couldn't be allowed to happen. The Greeks are in no position right now to tolerate the addition of an immortal enemy. From Athene's point of view, as both a pro-Greek god, but more importantly from a narrative perspective, since the structure of the Iliad requires that the Trojans have one and only one major hero, Hector, whose opposition to the Greeks and eventually to our protagonist Achilles himself will delineate the climax of the story being told by Homer, or the various Homers who work together to build the Iliad as it now stands, whatever your preferred authorship theory is. By integrating Rhesus into the story, but then immediately removing him as a threat, Book 10 provides a tense moment, but like everything about Book 10 and the isolated episode that it is, nothing about Rhesus's involvement in the Iliad has an impact beyond Book 10 itself. So spake he, and into that other bright-eyed Athene breathed might. Odysseus' question of which of them is to do the killing is quickly answered for them, as Athene gives strength to Diomedes, as she's previously done when Dolon was being chased. And he began slaying on this side and on that, and hideous went up their groaning, as they were smitten with the sword, and the earth was reddened with blood. And like as a lion cometh on flocks without a herdsman, on goats or sheep, and leaps upon them with evil will, so set the son of Tydeus on the men of Thrace, until he had slain 12. But whomsoever the son of Tydeus drew near and smote with the sword, him did Odysseus of the many counsels seize by the foot from behind, and drag him out of the way, with this design in his heart, that the fair-maned horses might lightly issue forth, and not tremble in spirit, when they trod over the dead, for they were not yet used to dead men. But when the son of Tydeus came upon the king, he was the 13th from whom he took sweet life away, and he was breathing hard, for an evil dream stood above his head that night, even the seed of Oeneus, through the device of Athene. Meanwhile, the hardy Odysseus loosed the whole-hooved horses, and bound them together with thongs, and drave them out of the press, smiting them with his bow, since he had not taken thought to lift the shining whip with his hands from the well-dight chariot. Then he whistled for a sign to noble Diomedes. Filled with the power of Athene, Diomedes lays waste to the Thracian camp, killing man after man. This is a slaughter. Surely the power of the goddess was also involved in keeping any of the Thracians from hearing and waking due to any of the groans or exclamations in this bloody scene. We're deep into the criminal side of things now. Spying unheroically is one thing, but killing men while they sleep, this felt wrong to the ancients as well. There will have to be some reckoning, some way for our unheroic heroes to be purified of their wrongdoing, but that time is not now. Odysseus, practical as ever, senses that these horses are unused to battle, unused to being around dead men, and likely to alert the sleeping enemy. With an eye toward keeping those horses calm, keeping them from making noise that might awaken other Trojan allies, and ensuring the horses are easily removed from the camp once Diomedes' rampage is over, Odysseus handles cleanup duty, pulling the corpses out of the way. Quietly and efficiently, Odysseus goes about his grim business while Diomedes does his. We do get explicitly told that Athene helped with the killing of the Thracian king, and the action pauses once Diomedes approaches Rhesus. This is a haunting scene, and as Wilcock points out, strangely impressionistic. Spread out on the ground below Diomedes and his drawn sword, Rhesus is sleeping, breathing hard, dreaming. Let's review the wording again because it's dense, complex, and it invites interpretation. He was breathing hard, for an evil dream stood above his head that night, even the seed of Oeneus, through the device of Athene. Does Rhesus see himself in his own dream? Does he see the evil dream, Diomedes himself, standing above his head? Previously in the Iliad, dreams have been personified as figures standing over the head of the sleeping dreamer. But in this case, the dream is not some personified concept, but a real man with a real murderous intent in his heart. Is Rhesus dreaming the very event that's happening now? Does he see in his dream his murderer standing over him? Why doesn't Rhesus awaken? Is he kept under the same spell as his men, none of whom waken as they're being killed? This is different, because Rhesos is the only one said to have an evil dream standing over him. Perhaps initially Rhesos didn't awaken because he believed it to be only a dream. Perhaps this is a description of the phenomenon of sleep paralysis, or an out-of-body experience. But ultimately, Rhesos doesn't awaken because the dream is real, as is the sword. The seed of Oeneus is, of course, Diomedes himself, both the bad dream standing over Rhesos in his mind and literally standing over him. He ends Rhesos' life, and the threat Rhesos' potential invincibility posed. Notice here the specific numbering of the Thracians killed, 12 Thracian men plus their king, making 13. I'll get back to these numbers later. This becomes an interesting point. The author specifies 13 killed here for a reason, but almost certainly not the reason you might suspect. But Diomedes stood and pondered what most daring deed he might do, whether he should take the chariot, where lay the fair dight armor, and drag it out by the pole, or lift it upon high, and so bear it forth, or whether he should take the life away from yet more of the Thracians. Having killed all the Thracians nearby, Diomedes is looking around thinking, what's next? Because these 13 Thracians are, of course, not the whole contingent sent by that nation, but only their king and his closest companions. Diomedes wonders, should I see if I could kill off the whole Thracian nation tonight? Or should I make off with these beautiful horses, the gold chariot and the gold armor? As he's thinking this over, tempted by the opportunity for more looting and murdering, Athene comes up silently next to him and says, Bethink thee of returning, O son of great-hearted Tydeus, to the hollow ships, lest perchance thou come thither in flight, and perchance another god rouse up the Trojans. So spake she. Meaning, Athene is telling Diomedes, it's time to head back. The Trojans are likely to get wise to our shenanigans once the gods on their side see what's going on. He observed the voice of the utterance of the goddess, and swiftly he sprang upon the steeds, and Odysseus smote them with his bow, and they sped to the swift ships of the Achaeans. Athene's warning to Diomedes comes not a moment too soon, but strangely enough, it's Athene speaking with Diomedes, which will draw Apollo's attention, not anything Diomedes does. Be that as it may, no sooner is the decision made to return to camp with their Thracian loot, when Diomedes and Odysseus immediately jump upon these speedy white Thracian horses and gallop back toward the Greek camp. As Diomedes and Odysseus head home, Greek audiences right about now love how the irony is played out. Hector had sent out Dolon to steal the best horses from the Greek camp, but instead, the best horses of the Trojan camp are being taken by Diomedes and Odysseus. In the only use of that bow Meriones had given him, Odysseus smacks the horses with it to speed them along. Debate exists as to whether it is only the horses or also the chariot stolen, but most believe only the horses. According to Wilcock, it is generally accepted that Diomedes and Odysseus ride on horseback out of the Trojan camp, leaving the magnificently ornamented chariot among the dead Thracians. The formulaic language, however, has no phrases for horse riding, a practice referred to only in the present exceptional circumstances and in a simile at 15.679. It seems there wasn't clear language at the time for horse riding as opposed to riding in a chariot being pulled by horses. Given the suddenness of Athene's warning to Diomedes and the lack of further references to the chariot even within Book 10, it seems likely we're to imagine that Odysseus and Diomedes only managed to steal the horses of Rhesos and had to leave his chariot and armor behind. We'll never get confirmation one way or the other. Part of Book 10's dreamlike quality is that these events taking place now are never referred to again. We simply wouldn't see Diomedes wearing Rhesos' armor in a later book, even if he did manage to steal it. Book 10 is a dream that, unlike Rhesos', we'll all wake from soon. Nay, nor a vain watch kept Apollo of the silver bow, when he beheld Athene caring for the son of Tydeus. In wrath against her, he stole among the crowded press of Trojans, and aroused a counselor of the Thracians, Hippocoon, the noble kinsman of Rhesos. And he started out of sleep, when he beheld the place desolate, where the swift horses had stood, and beheld the men gasping in the death struggle. Then he groaned aloud, and called out by name to his comrade dear. And a clamor arose, and din unspeakable of the Trojans hasting together, and they marveled at the terrible deeds, even all that the heroes had wrought, and had gone thereafter to the hollow ships. So Apollo, meanwhile, does indeed rouse a Trojan, or rather the Trojan ally and surviving Thracian Hippocoon, a relative of the now deceased Thracian king Rhesos. Hippocoon wakes to see the carnage, the men attacked by Diomedes, not all quite dead yet, but now gasping audibly in their death throes, now that Athene's spell of silence has been broken. Knowing that his cousin Rhesos had been sleeping among those who are now dead and dying, and hoping that his worst fear hasn't come true, Hippocoon calls aloud, "Rhesos!" Rhesos, of course, doesn't answer, but Hippocoon's plaintive cry awakes the entire Trojan camp, Trojans and allies alike. The entire field is now filled with noise and shouting. Everyone is trying to figure out what's going on, sharing reports of this heinous crime. The Trojans witness with dismay what Diomedes and Odysseus have accomplished. However, in the dark, in their confusion and delayed response, there's no way for the Trojans to know where to go or how long ago this crime was perpetrated. There is no pursuit. The Trojans have suffered a demoralizing blow when they least expected it. But when those others came to the place where they had slain the spy of Hector, there Odysseus, dear to Zeus, checked the swift horses, and Tydeus' son, leaping to the ground, set the bloody spoil in the hands of Odysseus, and again mounted, and lashed the horses, and they sped onward, nothing loth, to the hollow ships, for there they fain would be. Fleeing through the night, and hearing the clamor of the awakening Trojan camps all around them, Odysseus spots the tamarisk tree, where they'd left what they'd looted off Dolon. Diomedes jumps down, quickly gathers the bloody spoil, as it is called, and hands it to Odysseus before jumping back on his horse. They're off again, and quickly reach the Greek camp and the relative safety of the fortifications. But Nestor first heard the shout and said, "O friends, leaders and counselors of the Argives, shall I be wrong or speak sooth? For my heart bids me speak. The sound of swift-footed horses strikes upon mine ears. Would to God that Odysseus and that strong Diomedes may even instantly be driving the whole-hooved horses from among the Trojans. But terribly I fear in mine heart, lest the bravest of the Argives suffer aught through the Trojans' battle din." Waiting back at the Greek walls, Nestor hears hoofbeats and calls to the other Greeks with anxiety and far less certainty than we usually see in him, expressing the prophetic hope that these hoofbeats are Diomedes and Odysseus returning with stolen horses, but also the fear that maybe they've been killed, and presumably Nestor's fear that these are the hoofbeats of Trojans coming to attack, and that their friends are dead. Not yet was his whole word spoken when they came themselves and leaped down to earth, but gladly the others welcomed them with hand-clasping and with honeyed words. And first did knightly Nestor of Gerenia make question, "Come now, tell me now, renowned Odysseus, great glory of the Achaeans, how ye twain took these horses. Was it by stealing into the press of Trojans? Or did some god meet you and give you them? Wondrous like they are to the rays of the sun. Ever with the Trojans do I mix in fight, nor methinks do I tarry by the ships, old warrior as I am. But never yet I saw such horses, nor deemed of such. Nay, methinks some god must have encountered you and given you these. For both of you doth Zeus the cloud-gatherer love, and the maiden of aegis-bearing Zeus, bright-eyed Athene." Nestor's uncharacteristic anxiety is quickly relieved, and he meets Odysseus at the gate. Nestor is astonished to see his friends approaching on such magnificent white horses. It's with an almost boyish excitement that he assails Odysseus with questions about them. "How did you steal these horses? Did some god give them to you? Wow, they're beautiful," and so on. It's kind of adorable how excited he is. It's with this interaction that Nestor's not having worn any animal anything, the only major character in this book who this can be said of, makes sense to me now. Nestor is outside the action. He's awaiting them at the gate, this liminal space, the literal and metaphorical gate that Odysseus and Diomedes passed out of and now back in through this night. Nestor is the normal one, the human. The others are the animals. Nestor had no other identity. He was not an animal. The protagonists of Book 10, Diomedes and Odysseus, fulfilled this book's wolf theme to the extent that they traded in their humanity, hanging human garb upon a tree and stalking off into the night to commit the crimes of the wolf, the turning upon others, the concealment of their identities. Unlike the other Greeks who had to be awoken, Nestor was already awake, I'm grasping toward some hidden meaning here. Is there some sort of inverse dreamland happening where Nestor is the dreamer, or the only truly awake one, or somehow the only real one? It's hard to know exactly what the author is saying. The reality of Book 10 is elusive, its meanings veiled. I'm confident that Nestor is the key, though. I've made great progress in my understanding of Book 10 during this most recent reading, but there are still more secrets to discover. Now, let's rejoin the action as Odysseus responds to Nestor's enthusiastic questions. And him answered Odysseus of the many counsels, "O Nestor, son of Neleus, great glory of the Achaeans, lightly could a god, if so he would, give even better steeds than these, for the gods are far stronger than we. But as for these new-come horses, whereof, old man, thou askest me, they are Thracian, but their lord did brave Diomedes slay, and beside him all the 12 best men of his company. The 13th man was a spy we took near the ships, one that Hector and the other haughty Trojans sent forth to spy upon our camp." So spake he. Odysseus answers Nestor with kindness and patience, breezily saying that the gods could do anything they wanted, and could easily have given them even better horses than these. This is true, and I think it serves as a way for Odysseus to imply to Nestor that the horses were brought into their hands by the intervention of the gods, which is also true. Odysseus' next statement to Nestor is confusing. The part where he tells Nestor about the number of foes they killed tonight. Let's take a close look here. It seems like a very obvious miscounting. Odysseus accurately tells Nestor that the leader of the Thracians was killed, and also the 12 men around him. That would be 13. Yet Odysseus goes on to tell about their killing of a spy, who would be Dolon, of course, and specifically calls this the 13th man. Remember, the killing scene among the Thracians was very specific with the numbers. They killed 13 Thracians, 12 regular Thracians, and the Thracian king explicitly called there the 13th. So why is Odysseus downplaying their number of kills, very obviously providing Nestor with a wrong kill count, and only claiming 13, when even within the version of the story Odysseus tells Nestor, one can count 14 kills? I've looked at this passage in 4 different translations: the Green, the Langleaf and Myers, the Lattimore, as well as the Klein. The first 3 are all consistent in specifying Odysseus here claiming Dolon was only the 13th. Klein changes this to have Odysseus counting Dolon as the 14th. However, the word in the original Greek is triskaideka, 310. Very clearly, the author intends for Odysseus to indeed be saying 13, and one translator changing this to 14 obscures a point we're meant to observe. So why does Odysseus misnumber their kills? I'm not entirely sure, but I found a somewhat helpful answer in a brief article dated back to 1916 by an A. Berrydale Keith titled "The Unlucky Number 13," that looks into the history of the number 13 as an unlucky number, which of course is how we think of the number 13 in modern times. But Odysseus is intentionally steering his count toward 13, counter to what a superstitious person in modern times would do. According to Keith, it doesn't seem that 13 as an unlucky number predates Christianity, and a passing reference to the possibility that 13's unlucky character may be older in the literature of India is dismissed as lacking evidence. Keith holds that it was specifically the Christian association of 13 with the number of participants at the Last Supper and the crucifixion the next day that locked in 13 as an unlucky number that we think of it as today. For Odysseus living centuries before the Christian era, there was no such unlucky association to avoid. In the context of our current discussion, the number which was important to the ancient Greeks was 12, which to them came with a sense of completeness. Examples of the number 12 in ancient Greek culture are mostly positive, including the 12 Olympian gods, the 12 labors of Heracles, and of course the 12 lunar months of the year. Therefore, Odysseus's very obvious miscounting is likely about presenting the number which is immediately superior to 12, by the narrator adding 1 to 12 in the count during the killing of the Thracians, and Odysseus himself doing the same thing as he is telling the story of their adventures to Nestor. We're being given an exaggerated sense of their accomplishment, that they exceeded the number of completeness, 12, in a way that 14 just wouldn't convey. Odysseus drave the whole hooved horses through the fosse, laughing, and the other Achaeans went with him joyfully. But when they had come to the well-built hut of the son of Tydeus, they bound the horses with well-cut thongs at the mangers where the swift horses of Diomedes stood eating honey-sweet barley. And Odysseus placed the bloody spoils of Dolon in the stern of the ship, that they might make ready a sacred offering to Athene. Having done a little bragging to Nestor, Odysseus continues on through the gate, laughing with delight at his own accomplishments. Now it's the time to round up the loot. The horses are taken to Diomedes' hut for him to keep, while the spoils from Dolon are taken by Odysseus, who will prepare to offer them to Athene. But for themselves, they went into the sea and washed off the thick sweat from shins and neck and thighs. But when the wave of the sea had washed the thick sweat from their skin, and their hearts revived again, they went into polished baths and were cleansed. And when they had washed and anointed them with olive oil, they sat down at supper, and from the full mixing bowl they drew off honey-sweet wine and poured it forth to Athene. Diomedes and Odysseus bathe twice now, first in the sea, then in bathtubs, in the only instance of bathtubs being mentioned in the Iliad, although warming water for bathing is mentioned elsewhere. Following this double bathing, they next massage their bodies with oil. The bathing implies ritualistic cleansing, as their actions this night, while interesting and very different from the usual battle scenes, were murderous. The bathing, the anointing, and of course the dressing again in clean clothes afterwards. This is the process by which they become human again. This bathing is the undoing of their having become criminals, animals, werewolves even, which began with their placing the clothing looted from Dolon on the tree in an act that was surely meant to be reminiscent of the rites of Lycaean Zeus, before they went off into the wilderness and became wild animals themselves. Diomedes and Odysseus have been purified of their sins. Finally, they sit down to a meal where the final act of Book 10 is the two making a libation of wine to Athene, who made their victory tonight possible. The Greeks are not beaten, far from it. Where Hector had sent out a spy, hoping to learn the enemy were defeated in spirit and preparing to flee in their ships, he learned instead that they still had the will to fight back, even just symbolically. From their weakened position, penned up in their camp, or so Hector had thought, the Greeks have struck back. There will be no peace treaty. There will be no ransoms, no releases, no mercy, and no backing down. There will only be complete annihilation for the losers in this war. Nothing about the situation the Greeks are in now has changed. From a purely physical standpoint, the Greeks are still surrounded. Their only hope for victory is the return of Achilles, who has rejected their pleas. Their only chance for survival, a hasty and inglorious retreat by sea. The Trojans are still camped out on the field, ready to annihilate the routed Greeks. As we've seen throughout this episode, Book 10 really is dreamlike, and like a dream, none of these events will have a lasting physical effect in the morning. Rhesos will never be mentioned again, nor his killing, and the Thracians will again be led by Acamas, as they have been all along. But something has changed. In the morning, there will be an unease for the Trojans, a questioning of why they were so very confident yesterday. And the Greeks will have hope. They won't be sure why, but their hearts will be in the fight. Come back next time for Book 11, The New Dawn, and the goddess Discord, terrifying herald of Zeus, announcing the resumption of battle. Until next time, this has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thanks for listening.